With a serene smile, Grace makes a stunning declaration: let's get a divorce. Benjamin, holding a teacup, is completely taken aback by her words, while a maid looks on in distress. Unable to meet his gaze, Grace states that their marriage was purely for their families, and that he doesn't love her. Looking up towards the sky, she softly agrees, addressing him as Your Grace. In a poignant memory, Benjamin kneels before her, desperately begging her not to leave him. The scene transitions to the exterior of a magnificent, sunlit mansion. Lying in bed, consumed by despair, she whispers her wish to die before letting out a sudden gasp. She sits up abruptly, rejecting the thought and declaring that the old, despairing version of herself is gone. Looking at her reflection, she takes in her new appearance. A round face with freckles and vibrant, carrot-colored hair. She focuses on her dark, murky, teal eyes, questioning what kind of exhausting life she has been reborn into. Determined, she stretches and decides to calmly reassess her new reality. She realizes she has been reincarnated into The Saint's Wish, a cliched romance novel she read before her death. The story's premise is laid out. Arya, a beautiful woman, discovers one day that she is a saint. After being recognized, Arya travels to the capital, where she meets and helps many people, including the male lead, Crown Prince Sylvester. The narrative explains that Sylvester's position as the Crown Prince was unstable and dangerous. He was hiding a curse to survive, but his fate began to change after meeting Saint Arya, who weakened its hold. She muses that, so far, the plot is just a typical romance fantasy. A glint in her eye signals a sudden recollection of a unique twist in the novel. She recalls the story's second male lead, Benjamin Felton, the Duke of the North. As the main lead had black hair, she remembers Benjamin was the kind, brown-haired alternative. She recalls the most shocking detail about Benjamin: he was already married. She questions the author's choice to create such a dramatic backstory for him, but quickly dismisses the thought as irrelevant now. She feels a sense of unease, realizing that by inhabiting this body, she is slowly losing herself and becoming Grace. Two maids excitedly approach, offering her favorite food, tea, and a newly arrived limited edition tea set. She gently refuses their offers, feeling a pang of guilt for how worried her supposed depression has made them. The two maids look on, with expressions of deep concern for their madam. She reflects on her strange new life, wondering what happened to the original owner of a body so doted upon. Deciding she needs a change of scenery, she suggests going for a walk. The maids are overjoyed by her request and eagerly volunteer to prepare her favorite outfit immediately. Amid their cheerful chatter about a bath and clothes, she stares blankly at her own unfamiliar reflection in a grand mirror. A beautiful framed portrait shows her looking somber, surrounded by butterflies and flowers. A maid offers to remove the mirror, but Grace quietly tells her it's fine. She internally disagrees with the novel's description of Grace as fat and ugly, finding her rather pleasant looking. She concludes that the original Grace must have suffered from a severe and deep-seated self-loathing. As the maids offer to help with her bath, she politely waves them away, preferring privacy. She finds being bathed by others awkward, but is relieved to remember that the original Grace felt the same way. Submerging herself in the water, she surmises Grace disliked showing her body to others. The warmth of the bath soothes her, and she begins to feel a little better. The maids beam, telling her she looks amazing and that her first walk in a while must be perfect. She finds all the clothes they picked rather similar, but decides to trust their careful judgment. Dressed in an elegant dark gown, she stands ready, her hands clasped before her. She recalls that the original Grace was a recluse, and that she herself hasn't left the room since arriving. Understanding the maid's excitement, she steels herself, determined not to shrink back from this small step. The scene opens to a vast, stunningly beautiful garden filled with lush greenery and blooming flowers. Stepping outside, Grace is completely captivated by the breathtaking view before her. The maid excitedly explains that His Grace personally designed the entire garden to be seen from Grace's room, just for her. Grace gives a cynical smirk, finding the idea that any of it was for her utterly unbelievable given her circumstances. A close-up highlights the elegant pearl necklace adorning her neck. Benjamin suddenly appears in the garden, his green eyes locking with hers as he calls out her title. A memory of a young man's radiant, happy smile fills the scene. The orange-haired girl appears, timidly asking if her presence is unwelcome. The man turns to her, his expression softening as he admits he was worried. In a fond memory, the two are seen dancing closely together. A formal introduction appears, naming her Grace Felton. A decorative title card marks a transition in the story. Her history is explained. Grace Felton, née Linden, was chosen to suppress the power of the Felton ducal family. She reveals that she has been reincarnated into the body of this woman. She reflects that in the original story, the Linden family was too insignificant for Grace to have married into a ducal house. Despite this, Grace married Benjamin after meeting him only 3 times, then promptly withdrew from society. She recalls a moment where Benjamin looked at her with a hint of surprise. Another memory shows his genuinely warm and gentle smile. She bleakly concludes that they were never really a couple. Trying to soothe her own anxiety, she reasons that Grace merely had a poor marriage and didn't enjoy socializing. She reveals the true source of her fear. In the story, Grace dies from an unknown illness or is murdered by her husband. Gripped by terror, she wonders if her own death is now inevitable. The scene shifts in a flurry of bright, sparkling light. A hand suddenly grips her shoulder in a startling flashback. Reacting instinctively, she slaps the hand away, shocking the man who calls her madam. She quickly reassures him that there is no problem. He shows concern, asking if she feels unwell after being outside for the first time in a while. She remembers that in the novel, Grace was a minor character whose death was barely noted beyond Benjamin's claim of disease. After the Duchess's death, Benjamin began to change, slowly losing himself. He shed his trustworthy image and became the story's ultimate villain, targeting a woman named Arya. His obsession drove him to kidnap and attack Arya, and he eventually died in her arms. She questions the depth of Benjamin's love for Arya, certain he must have killed his wife because he was her favorite character. She remembers how she admired the kind-hearted Benjamin who spoke of his wife to Arya, only to realize he never loved Grace. Her heart pounds as she considers that a foolish wife like her was never truly loved. She wonders if her racing heart is a remnant of the original Grace's feelings for Benjamin. She collapses onto a sofa, utterly exhausted from the emotional ordeal. Lying down, she regrets not being able to ask for a walk alone because he insisted on following her. A cute animation illustrates him following her closely, which she hadn't anticipated. She decides not to send him away, unwilling to risk hurting his feelings. Determined, she decides to probe Grace's hazy memories for clues about Benjamin's guilt. A crucial detail emerges. Benjamin lived in the main estate, while Grace was confined to the annex. This meant they rarely interacted, making her wonder what she really died from, an uncertainty more frightening than murder. A maid notices her shivering and offers to start a fire, but Grace politely refuses. As she watches the maid, she begins to think that perhaps Benjamin isn't as cruel as she'd imagined. Growl. Her stomach lets out an enormous roar, breaking the silence and embarrassing her in front of the maid. The maid smiles brightly, asking if she should prepare a meal for her in the dining room. Surprised by the offer, Grace asks if she can eat in her room, and the maid happily agrees. Grace points to a spot, and the maid promises to prepare everything immediately. Once alone, she sits in silence, lost in thought. A jarring memory of a hospital monitor flashes through her mind, making her wonder if her past self truly died. A sudden sound startles her, and she questions if she misheard something. She becomes certain she heard a grotesque, mocking laughter echoing in her ears. As she turns toward a sound, the maid arrives at the doorway with her meal. The maid presents a bowl of soup, explaining it's easy on the stomach, and asks where to set it down. Grace gives a faint, appreciative smile and thanks her. Taking a bite, she's surprised by how delicious it is, but her attention is quickly drawn to something else. Watching from the window, Grace sees a carriage from the main estate departing. Benjamin looks ahead with a tense and determined expression as he leaves. Grace turns to Sally and asks where his Grace is headed, but the maid hesitates. Pressing for an answer, Grace points out that Sally clearly knows, but won't tell her. Leaning forward assertively, Grace demands to know where her husband is going. Sally reveals that His Excellency is going to serve at the Rondel Canal, which Grace thoughtfully repeats. With a flash of insight, Grace asks if St. Arya happens to be at the canal. Sally confirms the temple is holding a grand purification ceremony there, leading Grace to conclude the saint is definitely present. Staring at her reflection, she sees an ethereal image of Arya and thinks about her own face. She laments that on her, unlike Arya, fancy clothes and pearls must look out of place. A fleeting thought insists the pearls are a perfect match, but Sally's voice snaps Grace back to reality. Sally expresses her concern, asking Grace if she is all right because she looks unwell. Grace forces a bright smile, brushing off the worry by claiming she was just lost in thought. A radiant image of Arya appears as Grace recalls the novel praising the saint's beauty. The author's words describe Arya's perfection: snow-white hair, golden eyes, and flawless skin, the opposite of Grace. Grace pictures Benjamin's fated attraction to Arya accepting it as an unavoidable truth of this world. Her train of thought is broken by a single resolute word: exercise, leaving Sally utterly confused. Grace acknowledges that losing weight won't guarantee beauty, but she feels there's more to it. She reflects on gaining a body that can move freely and resolves to truly experience life in it. A chibi version of her pants with exhaustion, remembering the toll her simple walk took. She realizes her stamina is extremely low, admitting she can't even run properly. A small sense of relief washes over her as she realizes this body can at least walk, unlike her last one. Clenching her fist with newfound resolve, she declares she will improve her stamina and lose weight. She reaffirms her primary objective. She is doing all of this so she can divorce Benjamin. She pictures Benjamin and Arya together, wanting to break free before their relationship progresses any further. Determined, she vows to get a divorce quickly and begin a new life for herself. She reasons that by divorcing him, he won't see her as an obstacle to be eliminated. Concluding it's a matter of survival, she decides to try everything, from divorce to exercise. She admits her own incompetence, but refuses to remain stagnant and helpless any longer. She stands with quiet, solemn determination, her resolve now firm. Sally, noticing her intense expression, worriedly asks if she's okay. With a newfound clarity, Grace announces she will now manage her diet and exercise. She approaches a mirror, pondering that the basics of dieting are balanced meals and a consistent lifestyle. Feeling her body is unprepared, she worries it's too unhealthy to begin exercising just yet. She realizes a practical problem. She only owns dresses and has no suitable workout clothes. Turning to a bewildered Sally, she asks for comfortable, form-fitting clothes that aren't a dress. Sally asks if she should call the usual person, and Grace agrees it's best to use someone familiar. Musing on her own choice of words, Grace wonders just how deeply the original Grace hated herself. She dismisses Sally, deciding that simply being healthy and able to move is enough for now. The heavy doors close, leaving Grace alone with her thoughts in the vast, empty room. She reflects that upon possessing this body, Grace's overwhelming negative thoughts made it hard to think clearly. She was consumed by an inexplicable sense of powerlessness, feeling like she was adrift. After spending several days bedridden, she finally managed to adapt to the lingering depression. Lying in bed, she realized she was not in a modern Korean hospital. Once she grasped her reincarnation, she knew she had to find one crucial item: Grace's diary. With Grace's memories being so hazy, she knows she'll eventually be discovered if she can't find answers. Clenching her fist, she resolves to find the diary quickly to secure her place in this world. Frustrated after a fruitless search, she regrets wasting time being depressed instead of looking sooner. The lingering, self-deprecating thoughts of the original Grace continue to surface, driving her mad. As she opens a drawer, her search yields an unexpected discovery: a simple ring. She examines the ring, noting dismissively that its stone is just tacky glass. Holding the unfamiliar ring, a strange, unsettling feeling washes over her. Feeling deeply uncomfortable, she realizes her memories of being Grace stop at this point. A knock at the door is followed by a call for Sally, leaving Grace to wonder who that is. Remembering the friendly blonde maid, Grace gives permission for her to enter. Sally enters with a bright smile, politely announcing her arrival. Sally presents today's health supplements, which Grace had forgotten about in her recent haze, and thanks her. Sally mentions the master is worried about her skipping the supplements, making Grace question Benjamin's concern. A sudden, chilling suspicion forms in Grace's mind about the supplements' true nature. She asks what kind of supplements they are, but Sally only knows they were prescribed for her health. Clutching her hands, Grace looks deeply distressed by the vague explanation. She imagines herself dead, realizing she cannot trust them, and that they might be trying to kill her. Masking her fear with a smile, she asks Sally to tell Benjamin she's sorry for causing concern. Sally cheerfully accepts the message and takes her leave. Once the door closes, Grace is left alone with her thoughts. Turning away from the door, she immediately disposes of the suspicious pills in a nearby container. She watches the pills fall, her expression grim and resolute, staring at her hand. She wonders if they have been trying to kill her all along. The flames in the ornate fireplace crackle softly. Sitting by the fire, she dismisses the thought, deciding it doesn't matter when the attempts began. Standing up, she decides dieting is more urgent and resolves to head to the kitchen. Walking through a grand hall, she resolves to request lighter meals and smaller portions to avoid overeating. While eating a salad, she feels full but unsatisfied, sensing that something is still missing. Grace looks tired and unfulfilled, while Sally watches over her with a gentle smile. Sally cheerfully remarks that the madam's complexion has been looking great lately. Grace blushes slightly, acknowledging to herself that others have been saying she's prettier. In a cute aside, Sally admits she's only heard this from others. Grace wryly notes her lack of connections before turning her attention back to Sally. She asks about the tailor's visit, and Sally confirms they will arrive before lunch. A tempting thought of cookies is quickly dismissed as she remembers they're full of carbs. She resolves not to let the tailor feel poorly treated, despite her own dietary concerns. She questions why malicious rumors about her are circulating and wonders if she's truly that lazy or unattractive. Seated at the table, Grace listens as Sally gives a confirmation. A chibi version of her decides to have a glass of water before meeting the tailor. A tailor arrives, greeting the Duchess and presenting a catalog of new clothes she requested. Pondering the latest trends, Grace feels a bit lost about what's currently in fashion. She points her finger toward a dress design that catches her eye. The tailor sighs, bluntly suggesting that the chosen dress does not suit her. Confused, Grace asks why, and he explains another countess already had it made, which would invite ridicule. He recommends a different design, callously remarking that a flaw like copying is serious for an ill-fated noblewoman, enraging Sally. Grace calmly tells Sally it's fine, as she now understands the situation perfectly. With a defiant glare, she realizes the tailor is deliberately trying to provoke her. Overcoming a nagging voice of self-doubt, she resolves to deal with the insolent tailor. Tapping the catalog decisively, she declares the design tacky. The tailor, taken aback, asks her to repeat what she said. With Sally smirking behind her, Grace looks him in the eye and states firmly that all his designs are tacky. The evening sky darkens as the scene transitions. The title card for the story appears against the darkening sky. The tailor condescendingly claims Grace is unfamiliar with fashion, prompting her to demand he explain what she supposedly doesn't know. He explains her seclusion in the annex has left her out of touch with trends, so Grace turns to Sally for help, who agrees. Feigning distress, Grace complains she's lost her touch and scolds the tailor for suggesting an expensive dress instead of comfortable clothes. The narration reveals this is all a part of Grace's plan to start rumors through the annex staff. Knowing the gossipy annex employees will have heard about the tailor's visit, Sally is seen whispering with another maid. The plan hinges on what other employees will ask Sally and what her carefully prepared response will be. In a flashback, Grace instructs Sally on what to say, but her sudden, intense shout of, "Right now," leaves Sally startled. Sally stands in stunned silence, terrified by Grace's unexpected outburst. Grace reflects that while her plan put Sally in an awkward spot, she's trying to handle it like Arya from the novel would. Deciding she needs new clothes immediately, Grace tells a delighted Sally to call a different tailor, and Sally happily agrees. The first tailor looks completely flabbergasted by his sudden dismissal. With a dismissive wave, Grace declares that his predicament is none of her concern. Grace finds his supposed effort laughable, questioning why she should care when he's being paid so handsomely. She challenges him to justify his incompetence for the money he receives, leaving him utterly speechless. Seeing he has no response, Grace turns and opens the doors to leave. With a cheerful farewell, she promptly slams the door in his face with a loud bang. Standing alone in the hall, Grace remains silent for a moment. She briefly wonders if she was too harsh for costing someone their livelihood. Shaking off the doubt, she hardens her heart, telling herself she did well and needs to get a grip. The narration summarizes Grace's new resolution: to lose weight, get a divorce, and live a long life. Sometime later, Grace eyes a table full of fattening desserts, wondering why someone would prepare them. She awkwardly thanks the person responsible for the lavish spread. A new tailor, a young man with blonde hair, appears, pleased she likes the trendy desserts he brought for her. Pointing to a steaming cup, Grace cautiously asks if the drink is what she thinks it is. The new tailor confirms it's the trendy new coffee and offers to get her something else if she'd prefer. Internally celebrating, Grace happily accepts the coffee, saying she'd been wanting to try it. The new tailor beams, expressing his gladness that he could bring her something she enjoys. Mistaking his kindness for romantic interest, Grace panics, reminding herself the original story proves that can't be true. As he offers her a slice of cake, she politely declines, stating the refreshments are fine as they are. The new tailor looks up, confused by her refusal. Grace explains that she's trying to lose weight, which makes him clench his fist, wondering if the previous tailor is to blame. She clarifies it's for her health while savoring the coffee, adding that being overweight isn't appealing. Troubled, the new tailor brings up the rude tailor he recommended, and Grace confirms she remembers him. He reveals the tailor was exiled for tax evasion and stealing from the royal family, leaving Grace stunned. He smiles radiantly, vowing to protect her from such people and reminding her of her own belief that evildoers should be punished. His angelic smile makes Grace's heart thump, and she finds him utterly endearing. Grace reflects that the new tailor her husband brought was polite to a peculiar degree. She recalls the day this tailor, Benjamin, first met her, trembling nervously with a pale complexion, unable to meet her eyes. Watching him bow, Grace concludes that all the tailors her husband Benjamin brings are strange. She wonders if Benjamin is so distracted by Arya that he chooses her tailors carelessly, unaware his actions are those of an admired aristocrat. Sally rushes in with exciting news about the exiled tailor. Grace remembers, immediately worrying that the extreme punishment led to unforeseen complications. Sally waves her finger excitedly, telling Grace the news is absolutely incredible. It turns out the tailor was even worse than they knew, and Sally suggests celebrating with beef. Completely bewildered, Grace asks what exactly they are celebrating. Sally pauses, tilting her head thoughtfully. Feigning innocence, Sally apologizes, asking if Grace dislikes such topics and hoping she didn't make her uncomfortable. Grace feels irritated, wondering if Sally sees her as a naive, sheltered noble, an idea she finds unpleasant. Annoyed, she decides to go for a walk and asks a compliant Sally to help her get dressed. Wearing her new comfortable clothes, Grace takes a step and notices her body already feels lighter. Grace contentedly agrees she likes the new clothes and convinces herself that everything is fine. Benjamin suddenly appears, remarking on their coincidental meeting, which makes Grace question how strange it is to see him on every walk. She repeats the thought, reassuring herself that she has no doubts and that everything is fine. As they walk, Benjamin asks if she's also out for a walk, and she agrees the weather is lovely, while internally doubting their daily meetings are a coincidence. He suggests planting new saplings in the garden, proposing a peach tree since he remembers she likes them. Stunned, Grace murmurs, "peaches," prompting Benjamin to ask if her tastes have changed. In a flashback, a younger Grace tells a young Benjamin that she'll eat peaches if he gives them to her. Beaming, the young Benjamin suggests a peach tart would be nice, and she happily agrees. His smile fades as she then says she can't eat them because she needs to lose weight, leaving him disappointed. Back in the present, Benjamin changes the subject, asking Grace about her favorite flower. She admits that while she likes flowers, she doesn't know their names or how to tell them apart. Grace thinks to herself that her lack of knowledge doesn't matter since she isn't a gardener. Looking at the flower beds, Benjamin acknowledges he hadn't considered that problem before. They walk together in the garden, a quiet moment passing between them. From a distance, Sally watches them, looking somewhat anxious. Sally wonders about the distance between them, growing increasingly agitated before telling herself to calm down. Later, while seated, Grace points to her waist with a look of pleasant surprise. Sally excitedly confirms Grace's dress is looser than before, congratulating her on losing weight. Grace smiles, reflecting that simply adjusting her diet has already shown results. She happily resolves to ask for a divorce once she loses another 7 or 8 kilograms. When Sally asks about her daily walk, Grace replies that she can't skip it even once, or she'll lose motivation. Out in the garden, Grace notices Benjamin is absent and starts to believe their meetings might have just been a coincidence after all. Her peaceful moment is interrupted when she discovers small cards with the names of flowers placed throughout the garden. With a gasp, she clutches her chest, a sudden, shocking realization dawning on her. A memory of Benjamin's thoughtful expression comes to mind. Grace is left flustered, her heart pounding from the implication. She briefly wonders if the gardener placed the signs before concluding that's not right. Sally cheerfully appears and reveals that the master ordered them to place the signs for her. Grace is completely stunned, realizing his gesture is far beyond ordinary kindness. An inner voice scolds her for her delusions, and a whoosh sounds as she shakes off the embarrassing thought. Sally notices Grace is shaking, and asks with concern if she feels chilly. Grace stands alone in the garden, gazing up at the grand estate. Later, Sally voices her concern that Grace looks gaunt, which surprises her. Grace smiles reassuringly, explaining it's likely just due to her sudden weight loss. Sally presses further, asking if someone upset her and noting she hasn't visited this study lately. The mention of the study jogs Grace's memory as she looks toward the main building. She recalls her previous life, where she was also sick and confined, spending her time reading books just like the original Grace. Grace explains that staying cooped up in a room makes her feel depressed now that she's started moving around. Deciding to visit the study, she asks a delighted Sally to bring her some warm tea there. She reflects that the original Grace might have hidden something important in the study, recalling that fragments of Grace's memories remain with her. One specific memory begins to surface. She remembers the original Grace's excitement at seeing Benjamin on their wedding day. Dismissing the memory as useless, she approaches the study door. Shaking off the thought, she opens the doors, ready to focus on the, quote, small study. She's shocked to discover the room is a vast, magnificent library, nothing like the small study she remembered. Drawn by the light, she moves toward a large, ornate window. She looks out at the scenery, noting with disappointment that she can see the main building. Sally arrives with her tea, apologizing for the wait. Grace thanks her and gestures for her to set it down with a soft thud. A small, delicate white flower floats in the center of her steaming cup of tea. Sally explains the drink is a trendy new flower tea, offering to bring some equally fashionable flower-infused desserts. With a dismissive smile, Grace declines the offer, stating that desserts cause weight gain. Her focus sharpens as she realizes she must find the original Grace's diary immediately. She concentrates, recalling that her body remembers 3 specific places within the vast study. Her instincts guide her first to the ornate window, then to the sofa beside it. The third and final location her memory points to is a wooden desk. With a soft rumble, she opens the first drawer but finds nothing inside. She frantically searches through letters and papers on the desk, growing frustrated when the diary is nowhere to be found. Struck by a sudden thought, she glances around the room, wondering if there's a hidden mechanism. She finally finds the book, clearly a diary, and questions why it was concealed so carefully. Reading through the pages, she notes that it's more of a scattered notebook than a consistent diary. A painful memory surfaces from the diary. The original Grace had desperately wanted a child. The entry recalls the day she finally gathered the courage to discuss having a child with Benjamin. She was crushed by the unpleasant look in his eyes, forcing her to apologize and promise never to mention it again. She looks around the magnificent library, struck by the cruel irony that he decorated it to her taste, but denied her deepest desire. A single tear escapes as she whispers her true feelings. She doesn't like it. Her hand clenches tightly at her side, a silent testament to her inner conflict. Thud. The diary falls closed as the weight of the original Grace's memories of Benjamin overwhelms her. A dark realization settles in her mind. There is no love in this marriage. She admits to herself that, like a typical reincarnation trope, she once hoped her husband might grow to love her. Weeping alone, she acknowledges that this hope was just a delusion, fueled by the original Grace's lingering feelings. She is caught in a confusing storm of her own logic and the body's residual emotions for Benjamin. The cold truth leaves her in despair. Benjamin did not love her. In the darkness of her thoughts, a single fragile idea begins to sprout. Lying face down on her bed, Grace murmurs to a worried Sally, proposing they do that. Trying to lift her spirits, Sally excitedly announces an upcoming village festival. Sally continues, describing a masquerade with beautiful sights and delicious food, promising that nights will ensure her safety. Grace remains unresponsive, her back turned as she lies silently in bed. While Sally watches with hopeful eyes, Grace internally questions the kindness she's receiving from both her and Benjamin. A dark thought surfaces, wondering if she should simply let herself die amidst all this kindness. She has a strange vision of Sally and Benjamin standing before her younger, ethereal self. Sniffle. Grace looks over in surprise, asking why Sally is suddenly crying. Sally tearfully confesses that it hurts her deeply to see Grace unwell and feel unable to help. Grace quickly sits up to comfort Sally, reassuring her and apologizing for being lost in her conflicted thoughts. Offering a tired but reassuring smile, she softly suggests that they eat. A relieved Sally offers to prepare soup, and Grace thoughtfully asks which option would be quicker. Her thoughts drift to Benjamin's recent kindness as she quietly murmurs an apology to herself. The maids smile, and Sally comments that Grace's kind heart is what makes her so likable. An attendant suggests she take a bath while waiting for the soup, and she quietly agrees. Having bathed and eaten, Grace's small recovery marks a success for the staff's secret Save the Madam committee. Back in bed, and rereading the diary, Grace feels that something about the entries is odd. She scans the handwritten text closely, trying to pinpoint the source of her strange feeling. Her eyes fixate on the word suggested, sparking a suspicion that someone else influenced Grace's writing. She quickly flips the page, determined to uncover the truth. The next page reveals a calendar filled with consistent check marks. She's troubled, realizing the marks imply a regular routine that she has absolutely no memory of. This new mystery feels wrong. She had always assumed her memory gaps were simply a side effect of transmigration. Feeling she's missing a vital clue, her thoughts are interrupted by a tap at the window, causing her to sit up abruptly. She cautiously approaches her door, wondering who is throwing rocks at her room at this hour. Looking down into the garden, she is stunned to see Benjamin waving up at her. Grace panics internally, realizing she's made eye contact with the smiling, unignorable Benjamin. Blushing on her balcony, she thinks it might be all right for a moment as he calls out to her. A relieved Benjamin smiles, noting that she wasn't asleep after all. Grace questions his methods, asking why he didn't just send word through the butler or come to the annex. He looks away, explaining that he isn't allowed to enter the annex. Holding up a tiny rock, he explains he chose one quiet enough not to wake her if she were sleeping. He admits that's just an excuse, confessing he grew desperate since she hadn't been on her walks. After a moment of self-reflection, Grace's focus snaps back, questioning why he's barred from the annex. Benjamin explains the annex is off-limits to outsiders, and he can't enter without her explicit permission. A confused Grace tries to process the meaning behind his words. Shocked, she asks aloud if she is the one who has barred him from entering her residence. Benjamin simply smiles, his silence confirming her startling realization. Overwhelmed, Grace feels like she's going crazy now that she knows the truth. Changing the subject, she nervously asks why he came to see her so late at night. Blushing, Benjamin admits he was so overjoyed to see his wife that he almost forgot his reason. Startled, her eyes widen in shock at his unexpected words. Composing himself, he announces that a festival will be held soon. He nervously asks if she would be willing to go to the festival with him. A vision of an ornate mask introduces the mask festival, a place to hide one's identity. Surprised, Grace wonders if he is talking about the pivotal mask festival from the original novel. Her mind races in a swirl of purple doubt, questioning if he is actually asking her to go. As Grace blushes in stunned silence, Benjamin looks on with a puzzled expression. She suddenly yells, "No," while pointing toward the garden, creating a momentary diversion about a doctor. Leaning out the window with a blush and a determined look, Grace eagerly accepts his invitation. Thud! As her window shuts, Benjamin is left looking up from the garden, momentarily stunned. He stands alone for a moment, dazed and thoughtful in the moonlight. An attendant approaches from behind, formally addressing him as Your Majesty. He notes that Benjamin looks happy, prompting a pleased, self-satisfied smile from him. A cute, flustered version of Benjamin captures his lingering, happy shock. Benjamin declares to his attendant that he must set aside a full 24 hours for his wife. The attendant points out the festival doesn't last that long, and questions what he'll do if she calls. The assistant, Avel, doubts she will call but wisely decides to keep that thought to himself. Lying in bed, Grace sighs, finding it hard to believe she is actually going to the festival. She stares thoughtfully, her perspective turned upside down by the recent events. She recalls one of her delusions from the novel, where a masked Benjamin charmed a woman named Arya. The memory continues, showing how Benjamin used Arya to help choose Grace's gift while having an affair. Clenching her fist, she wonders if this time, things could actually be different from the original story. She contemplates the ramifications of attending the festival with her husband. She realizes their public appearance will spark rumors among the nobles that will reach the royal family. The ultimate conclusion dawns on her. The intended rumor is that their arranged marriage is a success. She chides herself for almost falling into the trap of believing Benjamin was starting to like her. Clutching her blanket, she resigns herself to the fact that her husband is madly in love, just not with her. She closes her eyes, deciding to sleep, reminding herself he'll be her ex-husband soon enough. The next morning, Grace stretches and feels refreshed, resolving to begin exercising again. She greets a busy-looking Sally and asks her what is happening. Sally beams, excitedly explaining that everyone is busy preparing for the mask festival. Grace remarks that she is surprised the news of her attendance spread so quickly overnight. Sally presents a dark cloak, asking Grace for her opinion on it for the festival. Grace thoughtfully touches her chin, commenting that the cloak looks thick and might be too hot. Sally enthusiastically explains the cloak is made from a magical beast's fur that absorbs heat. Grace smiles, remarking that the new development is quite convenient. Her expression shifts as she realizes she's seen this situation before in the original novel. Ah! A sudden memory strikes as she reaches for a dark garment. Her mind focuses on a specific detail from her recollection, a cloak with a green brooch. Maid quickly corrects her, insisting that's not what's happening. Grace freezes, understanding this is the very same gift Benjamin originally gave to Arya. In a flashback from the novel, Benjamin is seen kidnapping a bound Arya after the original Grace's death. A memory of Benjamin's unsettlingly charming smile flashes in her mind. The narration recalls how Arya, though seeing his warm smile, felt it was deeply frightening. Grace silently questions why Arya's cloak is now being presented to her. She carefully touches the intricate green brooch. Lost in thought, Grace hesitantly asks if it's okay for her to wear it, but the maid enthusiastically confirms they procured it just for her. Holding the cloak, Grace remains pensive, her expression filled with uncertainty. The maid laughs nervously, claiming everyone coincidentally managed to obtain the rare leather. Grace's eyes narrow in suspicion as she notices the covered windows. She questions the maid directly, asking if Benjamin instructed her to lie about how the gift was obtained. The maid's silence and nervous sweat give away the truth. Grace calls the maid Sally, stating her silence is confirmation and asks her to step aside, leaving Sally stunned. Holding the cloak, Grace walks past a flustered Sally with a determined look. She heads toward the balcony, ready to investigate the situation for herself. Outside, a group of exhausted knights relax, hoping to stay out of sight after a difficult expedition. One of the resting knights looks up in surprise, spotting Grace watching from a window above. Now, wearing the cloak, Grace confronts Sally again, demanding to know if finding it was truly a coincidence, causing Sally to stammer. The scene transitions, showing tree branches against a darkening sky. Sally expresses her concern for Grace, citing the long festival and large crowds. She tries to brush off Grace's suspicion, laughing and calling it a coincidence of fate. Confused by the odd phrase, Grace questions what she means. With swirling eyes, Sally excitedly explains how incredibly lucky it was to hunt the rare creature for the leather. Grace calmly raises her hand, signaling for her to stop. Overwhelmed by the rambling explanation, Grace tells Sally that's enough, and privately wonders how to proceed. She debates whether the cloak is a genuine gift or a hand-me-down from Arya, but ultimately decides to just wear it. Sally beams, exclaiming that it's a wonderful idea. Grace then asks for suggestions on how to thank the knights who worked to prepare the cloak for her. Sally proposes that the best gift would be seeing Grace wear the cloak on a date with Benjamin. Flustered, Grace asks if she means right now, and Sally eagerly confirms that Benjamin is already waiting. The maid gently pushes a hesitant Grace out of the room. Sally cheerfully presents the dressing room, inviting Grace to pick any outfit she desires. After trying on a dress, Grace notes it's a bit loose but decides to wear it for today and have it adjusted later. As Grace departs in her new cloak and dress, Sally wishes her a safe trip. The scene transitions to a bright, sunny day over the grand estate. Wearing a mask with her new cloak, Grace arrives at a garden balcony. A masked Benjamin stands waiting for her, saying he's been expecting her. As they meet and hold hands, he assures her she isn't late, as he simply arrived early. Benjamin smiles warmly behind his mask, looking pleased to see her. Grace touches the brooch on her cloak, admitting to herself that she doesn't feel any excitement. She remembers that in the original story, this festival was the setting for a romantic date between Benjamin and Arya. Knowing the cloak was originally intended for Arya drains the moment of any joy. Instead of feeling happy, she finds the entire situation makes her feel miserable. Benjamin suggests they use the back door to be discreet and use different titles while they are out. Grace looks at him curiously and asks for an example. Benjamin playfully suggests she call him Darling, then more casually offers Benny. Grace finds the suggestion of Darling a bit too forward for her liking. Agreeing to Benny, Grace suggests in return that he can simply call her my lady. Benjamin beams, clearly delighted by her playful formality. She inwardly remarks on what a strange person he is. He explains that he's an indoor person who has never really enjoyed festivals. He quickly clarifies that his personal preference is by no means an insult to her hometown. Internally annoyed by his over-explaining, Grace changes the subject to the temple hosting the festival. Benjamin explains the tradition of wearing masks comes from a legend about a mischievous demon. He continues, saying the demon is known to steal the face of someone it finds attractive. Grace recognizes the story, recalling it from a fairy tale her father used to read to her and her sister. He comments that she must have a good relationship with her sister, but she seems uncertain. Lost in thought, she tries to recall memories of her sister but finds she cannot. She realizes it's because she only has Grace's memories, not her own, from her past life. Benjamin gently takes her hand, calling her Your Excellency, and pulling her from her thoughts. Their gloved hands interlace as they walk through the crowded street. He holds her hand firmly as they continue their stroll together. Benjamin formally states that it would be proper for him to escort her from here. A flustered Benjamin adds that holding hands is better than simply crossing arms. Noticing she's been limiting her meals, he suggests she enjoy some delicious food for today. Grace hesitates, saying she will think about his offer for a moment. The thought of all the delicious festival food proves to be an overwhelming temptation. She internally despairs, wondering how she can possibly resist all the treats. Giving in to her craving, she decides she'll have just a little. Pleased with her decision, Benjamin offers to go buy them some food while she waits. He warns her about strangers, and she tells him to hurry back as he departs. Grace is left alone to wait amidst the bustling festival crowd. She watches him go, musing that he is the most dangerous person she needs to be wary of. She turns away, questioning her own uneasy thoughts about him. Approaching a small group sitting on the ground, she wonders if they are street vendors. She takes a step closer to the children, her curiosity piqued. Grace kindly leans down and asks a small boy what they are selling. The child nervously answers that it's soap, and asks if she is going to buy any. She observes the three children, who all appear weary and impoverished. Intrigued by their unusual wares, Grace looks at them with a thoughtful expression. The scene briefly focuses on foliage as she considers the situation. Standing before the children, Grace contemplates what to do. She notes the soap is completely ordinary and debates whether she should buy it. She questions her own motives, wondering if she would only be buying it out of pity. Changing tactics, Grace asks the children where their guardian is. A child points out their teacher, leading Grace to suspect they are orphans. Her expression hardens as she begins to worry the children are being exploited. Just then, a young woman carrying boxes approaches, asking if Grace is a customer. A promotional page for the series is shown. Grace asks the woman if she is the orphanage's manager, but she denies it. She explains she's just an ordinary teacher as two of the children hide shyly behind her. As the teacher smiles, Grace internally voices her suspicion that someone is embezzling donations. She deduces that the orphanage's director is the only one in a position to do so, and the thought bothers her. Grace considers her options: buy the soap, sponsor them as the Duchess, or find a way for them to become self-sufficient. Walking through the festival, Grace wonders if her urge to help others is a remnant of the original Grace's nature before a blonde woman asks for her name. She introduces herself simply as Grace, vaguely explaining that helping is just how she does things. The blonde woman smiles brightly and introduces herself as Cleta Dunn. Acknowledging her, Grace wears a sly smile behind her mask as she begins to propose an idea. Deciding to trust her instincts, Grace resolves to follow her heart and help Cleta. Leaning in close, Grace surprises a flustered Cleta by offering to help her sell all of her soap. Cleta's face breaks into a comically overjoyed and overwhelmed grin at the generous offer. In a cute interlude, Cleta introduces her masked husband, Benny, to Grace. Cleta explains she has all the materials to make soap, plus some candy for the children. Benny kindly offers a piece of candy to a grateful young girl. While Cleta worries about childcare, Grace focuses them on the task at hand, making the soap. Grace reveals she has brought high-quality herbs and trendy pressed flowers to elevate their product. As they work together, Cleta looks on in amazement at Grace's skill and preparation. Cleta remarks that Grace's skill is incredible for a mere hobby, as Grace stirs the mixture with expert speed. Their hard work results in numerous bags of beautiful, professionally packaged soap. Cleta marvels at the luxurious final product, estimating it could sell for 450 zen a bar. With a confident smile, Grace boldly declares they will sell it for 900 zen instead. At their sales stall, Cleta is visibly shocked and nervous about the high price Grace has set. Grace confidently promises Cleta that she will prove to her every last bar will sell out. Two masked men passing by are immediately intrigued by the fresh and fragrant scent wafting through the air. Nearby, two women notice beautiful soap bubbles and realize they're the source of the delightful aroma. Someone blows a stream of iridescent bubbles, which are praised for their beauty. Grace smiles, surrounded by enchanted children who are captivated by the floating bubbles. At their busy stall, Cleta demonstrates the soap's lather while Grace entertains the children. Watching the happy scene, Cleta notes how much the children are enjoying the bubbles. Cleta looks at the mysterious masked woman with awe, wondering who she could possibly be. When a customer asks what they are selling, Cleta cheerfully presents their soap. A customer praises the soap's beauty, and Cleta proudly explains the effort they put into making it. Grace decides to enhance their sales pitch by creating a hometown legend for the soap. Together, they tell customers that using the soap will make their wishes come true, with Cleta playing along enthusiastically. The romantic story works perfectly, convincing a couple to consider buying a bar. A large crowd gathers, buzzing with excitement over the pretty, wish-granting soap, and deciding to buy it. The scene transitions from the dusky evening to a starry night over the festival. As night falls, Grace walks alone through the quiet streets, carrying a now empty basket. Exhausted but satisfied, she reflects that she only helped with sales because Cleta looked so tired. She recalls the moment an overjoyed Cleta thanked her after selling out completely. Despite feeling proud of their success, a sudden and awful feeling washes over Grace. She clutches her chest, overwhelmed by a wave of queasiness and tightness. As Grace feels a sense of emptiness, a man's hand abruptly grabs her shoulder from behind. The man who bumped into her smirks cruelly, callously commenting on the noise she made falling. On the ground, Grace pulls her hood over her head, trying to hide her face in shame. Internally, Grace knows the drunken man bumped into her first, but old fears paralyze her, and she finds herself completely unable to speak up or defend herself. The man's insults trigger painful memories of others, calling her clumsy and comparing her fall to an earthquake. Surrounded by shadowy figures of her past tormentors, Grace is terrified by their cruel words. A voice from her memory commands her to stop eating as she weakly whispers for someone to help her. Overwhelmed by the traumatic flashback, Grace collapses to the ground, desperately calling for help one last time. A calm, steady hand appears as a new voice coolly remarks on the man's lack of manners. Thump. A masked man stands over the fallen bully, remarking that he had been in a good mood. His voice laced with ice, he tells the man not to make him feel disgusted in an instant. Shocked, Grace internally questions if she is really hearing Benjamin's voice. He approaches and gently places a gloved hand on her head. Looking down at her, he softly asks her to listen to him. Benjamin embraces a crying Grace, telling her they should go home and offering to carry her if needed. Crying into his chest, Grace confirms with relief that it is indeed Benjamin's voice. The scene transitions to a bright, sunny day at the estate. Having returned, Grace curls up by her bedroom door, reflecting on how absurdly sad she suddenly felt. In bed, she finds she can't stop thinking about the alley, wondering if it's because she now has friends. She reflects on her conflicting feelings of joy and her desire to both visit and avoid the orphanage. Overwhelmed by her emotions, Grace clutches her face in her hands. A concerned Sally peeks into the room, calling out to her. Grace decisively tells Sally to bring her the ledger, and she quickly agrees. Alone again, Grace sits on her bed with a tired but resolute expression. A bright blue sky marks a moment of transition. The scene shifts through a view of green foliage. Looking through the ledger, Grace notes its organization but questions the frequent purchases of gold ornaments. Her eyes narrow as she begins to review the past 2 years since her wedding. She flashes back to a conversation with Benjamin, where she misstated how long they'd been married. The memory triggers a wave of panic as she realizes her huge mistake. Back in the present, she wonders with relief if he simply let her slip-up slide. Deciding to focus on the future, Grace plans to use the estate's extra funds to help the orphanage. She devises a plan to start a small tea business for commoners to support the orphanage. Concluding it's best to manage it herself, she decides to buy land close to the estate. As Grace gives her new instructions, Sally excitedly announces that a gift has arrived from His Excellency. A flustered Grace looks up, surprised by the news of a gift. She flashes back to Benjamin at the festival, wondering if he was truly in a good mood that day. Recalling his angry expression, she feels an awkwardness settle over her. She admits to herself that she is scared. Grace stares blankly ahead as Sally waits patiently. After a moment of silence, a beaming Sally confirms the gift has arrived. Confused by the gesture, Grace simply asks, "Pretty?" Sally leads her down a magnificent sunlit hallway. Grace is presented with an array of beautiful small flowers in ornate pots. Smiling softly, she touches a daisy and agrees the gift is truly pretty. Sally presents another item, asking what should be done with it. She reveals a decorative tin box, noting that the contents look like cookies. An idea strikes Grace, and she asks Sally to take the cookies to a nearby orphanage. A close-up shows her determined and thoughtful expression. Spotting a gift of herbal tea, Grace declares the timing perfect and asks Sally about finding some unused muslin. Sally turns back with a pleasant smile, ready for the next instruction. Grasping the tea, Grace smiles and says she has one more favor to ask. The scene transitions to a city street as Grace leaves the estate. She walks in a dark cloak, thinking it was kind of everyone to permit her outing, especially Benjamin's unexpected reply. She recalls Benjamin's suggestion that she have someone follow from a distance for her own safety. Grace remembers being surprised by how considerate his offer was. She recalls agreeing to his terms, clenching her fist with newfound resolve. Walking through the quieter streets, she reminds herself that helping Cleta is also beneficial for her own plans. She reaffirms her goal, remembering from the novel that a good social reputation is crucial for a divorce. She reflects on future events, recalling a pollution incident and a meeting between Benjamin and Arya, but decides to focus on the orphanage. A woman in suspenders looks shocked, while the orange-haired girl beside her smiles, prompting her to ask if this is the business she meant. The orange-haired girl presents a small muslin pouch, explaining it's a sample of her new invention, the tea bag. She explains that the Empire's advanced transport gates make importing a wide variety of teas possible. However, she notes that tea isn't a popular beverage among commoners. The woman in suspenders, holding the tea bag, questions what the turnover rate has to do with it. It's explained that preparing tea requires extensive time, effort, and expensive sets, a luxury most commoners cannot afford. The orange-haired girl demonstrates how her invention simplifies the process, requiring only a brief dip in hot water. The woman in suspenders stares in wide-eyed realization, a look of pure astonishment on her face. She raises practical objections, pointing out they lack a store, a way to source ingredients and staff for the orphanage. A confident smirk appears on the orange-haired girl's face. With a radiant smile, she announces that all of those problems have already been resolved. The woman in suspenders is stunned by this news, barely able to ask what she means. The orange-haired girl details her plan. She has secured tea ingredients from a plantation, will use the orphanage as the store, and will market the products as supporting the children to guarantee sales. The woman is left utterly speechless, silenced by the thoroughness of the plan. A determined hand rests firmly on the table. A woman with a headscarf appears as the orange-haired girl reveals the final piece of her plan, hiring the children's mothers. Completely shocked, the woman in suspenders stammers, asking how she could have possibly known. She clarifies her question, asking how she knew the children in the orphanage had mothers. The orange-haired girl looks aside, preparing her simple explanation. She lets out a small, knowing laugh. She explains it was obvious because the children were too well kept for Cleta to be their only caretaker. She then asks Cleta if the children are aware of their mother's existence. With a heavy heart, Cleta nods in confirmation. The orange-haired girl smiles gently, processing the information. As a kettle whistles, Cleta quietly says, "Thank you." She explains that the orphanage is in desperate need of funds. Cleta believes some of the mothers must be secretly donating to support their children. She concludes it's because the orphanage is the only place they can continue to see their kids. The orange-haired girl respectfully states she won't pry into their circumstances, as it wouldn't be right. Instead, she has another question, asking for the whereabouts of the head of the orphanage. Cleta reveals the grim truth. He gathered all the money and fled when he realized the orphanage wasn't profitable. The orange-haired girl thanks her for the information and confidently declares she will hire all the mothers. Seeing children watching ants, she proposes turning the building's empty spaces into work areas and housing for the mothers. Cleta is overjoyed, realizing the plan will save money and let the mothers live with their children. The orange-haired girl begins to explain where she'll get the ingredients. She reveals she chose land that will soon be blessed by Saint Arya, ensuring its quality. She asks Cleta to approach the mothers with the job offer. She's shocked to learn that out of 7 mothers, only 1 has accepted the proposal. Dejected, she realizes the project is meaningless unless all of them are on board. While reviewing her plans, she resolves that her project to build a reputation must not ruin the mothers' lives. She reaffirms her goal to create a business where mothers and children work together, securing a large future workforce. Frustrated, she wonders why the mothers rejected her proposal and considers hunting down the former orphanage head, but fears Benjamin will find out. A maid quietly watches over her as she sleeps. She jolts awake, struck by a sudden realization. Now sitting up, she decides to meet the mothers in person, debating whether an expensive gift would be appropriate. A maid is startled by her sudden change in demeanor, crying out in surprise. The orange-haired girl excitedly pivots, suggesting a handmade gift might be better. She has a brilliant idea. Stationery made from the pressed flowers his grace gave her. Sally is visibly flustered, desperately wanting to ask a question, but finding herself unable to speak. Overjoyed, Grace urgently tells Sally to prepare everything for her new plan. A concerned Sally asks if Grace is truly sure about her decision. The scene shifts to a grand building under a bright, clear sky. That night, Benjamin feels a sudden chill in his office, looking up in confusion. Night falls over the quiet estate, setting a new scene. A woman in simple clothes endures a grueling life, working tirelessly from dawn till dusk. She clutches her bag, reminding herself she can't quit the hard-won job. She reflects on her upcoming work anniversary, hoping to finally buy her child a gift. Her thoughts are interrupted when she discovers a beautifully decorated, sealed envelope. Suspicious, she scoffs at the letter, assuming it's a noble's frivolous invitation to a hobby group. Deciding to throw it away, she hesitates when a pleasant scent wafts from the letter, prompting her to read it. The letter, from Grace, is a friendly greeting to a lady Catherine about a child named Ash's recent success. Catherine reads on, surprised that the letter contains no mention of business at all. A single tear traces a path down her cheek as she reads the heartfelt words. She thinks to herself that simple, kind words like these are not enough. Overwhelmed, Catherine cries with a look of profound gratitude, clutching the letter to her chest. Finding the sender incredibly strange, she approaches the door with lingering uncertainty. As time passes, more kind and gentle letters continue to arrive. Each day, another letter appears in the mailbox, a constant, gentle presence. A determined Grace clenches her fist, declaring her plan is only just beginning. Reading a letter, Grace notes that Cleta seems happy, which sparks a deep longing within her. She thinks of the children, realizing how much she wants to visit the orphanage again. The scene transitions to a bustling city street, viewed from above. Walking with a smile, Grace reflects that working gives her a sense of worth and happiness. Her pleasant thoughts are cut short as she unexpectedly runs into a woman with striking white hair. In a memory, a blonde man addresses the woman as Your Grace, while she smiles lovingly at him. A radiant vision reveals the woman's name, Aria Miller. Back in the present, Grace stands before a neatly made bed and declares her task is done. She smiles, reflecting on the kindness she has received from the women at this place. A young attendant informs Grace that the mothers are waiting, and Grace agrees to meet them. Grace tells a skeptical Cleta they're visiting a textile workshop to negotiate a business deal. Grace reassures Cleta, explaining her plan is for the future and they will target a smaller workshop. Grace explains her strategy to partner with smaller workshops overlooked by major dress shops. A flurry of paper patterns visualizes their future design and production efforts. Grace reveals her marketing plan to a shocked attendant, distributing the first tea bags for free to local restaurants. She explains that since the product is new, they must first build awareness through advertisement. Grace smiles confidently, certain that her marketing strategy will succeed with at least one restaurant. The narration reveals a key problem. The capital's water tastes strange due to contamination from the West. This contamination issue, she recalls, was a plot point from later in the original novel. Deciding to use her future knowledge, Grace turns her attention to a newly arrived supply carriage. The attendant and the other women stare in shock, overwhelmed by the size of the carriage. Grace briefs the women, explaining their workload will increase significantly once 5 restaurants adopt their tea. She then announces her next stop is to visit a workshop. A woman named Mother Lily steps forward, asking if she can accompany Grace. At the first textile workshop, a shopkeeper displays a piece of fine fabric for Grace and Mother Lily. At the second location, Grace inspects another cloth as Mother Lily looks on thoughtfully. Tap. As they leave, an older woman with Grace finds the quick negotiations surprisingly anticlimactic. She elaborates, admitting she expected resistance to a business run entirely by women. Grace smiles, suggesting their smooth success is simply a testament to the quality of their business plan. The woman questions Grace's choice, asking why she selected the shabbiest workshop over a nicer one. Grace considers the woman's question, thinking to herself. She reflects that admitting her cloak's value would be awkward. Grace explains internally that her cloak is made of magical beast leather, a material only a true professional, like the last workshop owner, would recognize. Finding it hard to explain her true methods, she simply offers a pleasant smile. Mother Lily confirms Grace's assessment with a simple, "Ah yes." Winking confidently, Grace praises the last workshop's ability to produce such fine, thin fabric. Walking with Mother Lily, Grace feels a deep satisfaction as her plans begin to succeed. Her peaceful walk is interrupted as she spots a man talking with the woman with white hair. Grace's thoughts identify the woman immediately, Aria Miller. Looking at Aria's elegant profile, Grace is struck by how beautiful she is. She pulls her hood tighter, feeling insecure and painfully aware of how different she is from Aria. The blonde man from the vision smiles charmingly. A close-up on a green eye reveals a tear welling with emotion. The man with ashy hair notices Grace staring and calls out, prompting her to quickly tell Lily they should leave. Confused by her sudden departure, the man asks where she's going. He kindly offers to carry her luggage for her. Grace coldly declines, stating her companions aren't particularly important, which shocks the man. Whirling around, she challenges him, asking if he truly believes the only saintess in the Empire isn't important. Stunned, the man stammers, asking how she knew about Aria's identity. Grace smirks confidently, telling him not to treat her like an idiot. Aria stands in the background, looking on with a surprised expression. Grace and Aria's eyes meet in a tense, silent exchange across the street. The scene transitions, showing a sunlit view of the city building. Back at the workshop, Grace reflects on Mother Lily's considerate nature, noting she never asks probing questions. Surrounded by the women and children, she wonders if their shared work has created a bond between them. Snip. As she cuts fabric, Grace laments how her emotions spiral out of control whenever Benjamin is involved. The group continues their work together in the sunlit room. Grace hardens her expression, realizing she must get a divorce before she learns of Benjamin's feelings for Aria. Sunset falls over the grand estate, signaling a change in mood. Flop. Grace collapses onto her bed, overwhelmed with exhaustion, a headache, and a churning stomach. Clutching her head, she debates whether to admit how much the diary has changed her. She finally accepts her new reality, acknowledging that she has become Grace Felton. A letter with a floral design is held in her hand. Reading the letter, Grace smiles, relieved to hear that Cleta is doing well. In a flashback, Grace explains to a shocked Cleta that she'll still collect her share of the profits. Grace reaffirms her trust in Cleta's determined and capable nature. Sighing, her thoughts return to the one thing on her mind: the divorce. Grace asks Sally about Benjamin's availability, and Sally reports that he should be resting. Hearing he's not busy, Grace requests a moment to speak with him, much to Sally's delight. Acknowledging her decision feels rushed, Grace resolves to see it through before her resolve wavers, contemplating how to begin. In a beautiful gazebo, she prepares to finally tell Benjamin what she has to say. Across from Benjamin, Grace takes a calming sip of tea before beginning her important conversation. Benjamin blushes slightly, warmly encouraging her to speak her mind. Grace gazes away, steeling herself against his apparent kindness, determined not to be swayed. She reaffirms her decision, refusing to die for a one-sided love that won't be returned. The night sky darkens, reflecting her somber thoughts. She recalls the vision of Benjamin and Arya, convinced he will eventually choose her. Convinced she means nothing to him, Grace declares she won't die for unrequited love. Facing Benjamin with a bright, determined smile, she makes her request: "Let's get a divorce." Benjamin stares in shock, as Grace flatly states he doesn't love her, and that she can't bear to see his face. In a fleeting reflection, Grace resolves to get a divorce and promises to disappear from his life forever. A quiet moment focuses on the intricate blue brooch pinned to Benjamin's cravat. Tears stream down Benjamin's face as he chokes out, "Why are you saying that?" Utterly bewildered by his reaction, Grace is rendered speechless with a cartoonish look of shock. A crying Benjamin desperately asks what he did wrong, while a stunned Grace addresses him as "Your Excellency." Looking utterly heartbroken, Benjamin promises he will do anything she wants. He offers to kneel or even wear a mask for the rest of his life if his face displeases her. On his knees, he tearfully pleads with her to reconsider. He desperately clutches her hands, begging her not to leave his side as Grace looks down in shock. Internally, Grace panics, wondering what on earth he is talking about. She remembers the vision of him with Arya, convinced he is in love with the Saintess. Benjamin tightens his grip, admitting that he knows he has many shortcomings. He blames himself for not noticing her distress, accepting her decision as his own mistake. Grace is completely thrown by his reaction, wondering why he's crying when he should be happy. As Benjamin wipes away tears, a flustered Grace wonders if she should comfort him. A close-up captures Benjamin's face, etched with profound sorrow and loss. Holding a small box, he looks up with renewed determination, stating there is, however, a problem. A view of the garden hedges underscores his somber declaration. A dramatic visual explains that for high nobility, divorce is a complex matter handled by the royal court. He elaborates that the process is complicated and requires a grace period of 1 month to a year. Benjamin explains that during this grace period, they must meet frequently and even attend official events as a couple. The thought of attending official events together leaves Grace completely aghast. Benjamin quickly reassures her that those are only the worst-case scenarios. Overwhelmed, Grace's spirit seems to leave her body as she asks to be excused to rest. Benjamin apologizes, insists on handling the documents himself, and urges her to rest. The scene shifts to the grand palace of the imperial family. A pair of boots rests casually on a desk, overflowing with stacks of documents. A man with dark hair and purple eyes laments his boredom while idly manipulating magic. He complains that nothing fun is happening, and a caption introduces him as Crown Prince Sylvester. An attendant rushes in, urgently calling for the Crown Prince, to which Sylvester responds nonchalantly. Sylvester languidly waves off the attendant's panic, asking what the big rush is. The attendant holds up 2 scrolls, announcing that a divorce application has arrived. Piqued, Sylvester smirks at the news of a high-ranking noble's divorce and asks who it is. The attendant hesitantly reveals the application is from the Felton Duke's family. The news stuns Sylvester, who blurts out, "Duke Felton is getting a divorce." Elsewhere, Grace reads the official notice, surprised by the lengthy 8-month grace period. She wonders what to do during that time, as a butler stands before her. The butler suggests she have dinner with His Excellency, a proposal that catches her off guard. He explains that sharing meals is a marital activity considered by the Imperial Legal Department. Musing on the odd legal requirements, Grace asks if she must remain at the main estate. The butler confirms it's no issue, and Grace asks to go out, promising to return by dinner. He permits her to leave on the condition she is accompanied by a knight who won't give a detailed report. Donning her cloak, Grace resolves to head out and visit the orphanage again. Walking through an opulent hall, Grace finds the atmosphere of the estate suffocating. A sudden gust of wind gently sweeps through the hallway, catching her attention. She stops, realizing the breeze is coming from an open window nearby. Curious, Grace approaches the open window to look outside. Her eyes narrow slightly as she spots something below in the garden. Looking down from the balcony, she sees an intricate rose garden and wonders what's happening. In the garden, Grace searches for something specific, thinking it should be around here. She stops on a stone path, realizing she's found the place she was looking for. Thump! Her footsteps come to a sudden halt. She mentally notes a small, pale pebble on the ground, finding it unremarkable at first glance. Her hand reaches down to pick up the curious stone. As she examines it, she senses that the small pebble gives off a bad feeling. Grace lifts the stone, her expression serious as she studies it. Holding the pebble close to her eye, she notices something unusual within it. She's shocked to see the reflection of an incredibly extravagant carriage inside the stone. The reflection shifts, revealing the back of a man as Grace wonders who it could be. He turns, and she recognizes him instantly with a gasp. Sylvester Byman. Startled, Grace's eye widens in shock at the sudden vision. The vision of Sylvester lingers in her mind as she stares at the mysterious pebble in her hand. She realizes with a jolt that she has just seen the male protagonist from the original novel. Sally approaches, finding Grace in the garden and calling out to her. Grace asks where the strange stones came from, but Sally wonders if she just means their color. Sally explains that lighter colors are fashionable, but Grace insists that's not what's strange about them. As Grace holds the stone, sensing something is wrong, it begins to crack with a faint spark. Pow! The stone explodes in a burst of dark energy, shattering and drawing blood from her hand. A single drop of blood falls as Sally watches in horror, stammering in fear. "Madam!" Sally lets out a terrified scream. As her hand is bandaged, Grace's thoughts reflect on how unbelievable it is for a pebble to explode. A flustered Sally chatters nervously, relieved she was there to provide immediate first aid. Sally then reports that the Crown Prince has arrived and will likely stay for dinner. Clutching her bandaged hand, Grace realizes this means she can't have dinner with Benjamin. She takes a resolute step forward. Grace decides to proceed with her original plans, telling Sally they can have a meal another time. Sally smiles and agrees, holding a basin. Walking through a magnificent hall, Grace reflects that it's been a while since she walked this path. She hears a familiar voice and thinks with irritation. "Ah, seriously, brother." Sylvester's voice echoes angrily, shouting that someone is impossible to talk to. Grace wonders about the loud argument and sees Sylvester confronting Benjamin. Their eyes suddenly meet, and Grace is stunned to see Sylvester in person. Sylvester seems to recognize her from somewhere, while Benjamin calls out to her in surprise. A small, flustered Sylvester continues to stare, confused by her presence. Sylvester demands to know why Benjamin didn't introduce her, while Benjamin asks Grace what she's doing there. Benjamin notices her injury, but Grace dismisses it as a minor accident. He gently takes her bandaged hand in his own. Looking at her with deep concern, Benjamin says she seems to be badly injured. Grace blushes and insists it's not serious, while an unseen Sylvester glares with fury. Sylvester pointedly steps between them, interrupting their moment. He angrily tells them not to get lost in their own world as the scene transitions away. Benjamin grabs Sylvester by the head, sternly reminding him to be polite to his wife. Still holding a struggling Sylvester, Benjamin announces he will escort him to his room. Grace smiles brightly, telling him to go ahead, privately hoping he doesn't come back. A knight approaches, apologizing for the delay and checking if she is all right, which she confirms. He explains that the prince's rude behavior is due to his informal relationship with Benjamin since childhood. Grace listens to his explanation and simply replies, "I see." The knight offers to escort her, and she readily agrees. The scene transitions to a sunlit view of an elegant building. Arriving at the orphanage, Grace cheerfully announces her return to Cleta. A woman with blonde hair gasps in surprise at Grace's sudden appearance. She beams with joy, clearly thrilled to see Grace again. Another woman hands Grace a document, questioning why she's visiting when she seems to be doing fine. Grace reads the document, impressed by the long-term contracts, and realizing from her transparent expression that they're succeeding thanks to Lily. Lily explains the high cost of gate travel has kept her from the tea fields, prompting Grace to decide to go herself. Grace advises against using the gates, citing rumors of unstable energy in certain regions. As she speaks of the gate, she's struck by a vision of Benjamin holding Arya amidst rubble and chaos. The vision intensifies, showing a massive explosion and injured people strewn across the street. Gasp! Snapping back to the present, Grace realizes with horror that she's remembering the gate disaster. A flashback explains that a western-bound gate malfunctioned, connecting dimensions and causing casualties. Though the victims were rescued, the narration concludes that the mental trauma left everyone deeply shaken. Grace considers the possibility of preventing the disaster, even if it hurts her business. Lily and the others wave her off, wishing her safe travels as Grace departs. Walking along a stone path, Grace decides to first visit the Gate Management Bureau. She resolves to use her condition as a reckless way to prevent the impending disaster. She reasons that if she stops the incident, Benjamin won't be blamed this time, recalling how easily people tear down a hero with one flaw. A vision reminds her of Benjamin's suffering while comforting Arya, a situation that made his love for the Saintess inevitable. Grace falls silent, contemplating the difficult path ahead. She wonders if preventing the disaster will stop Benjamin from loving Arya, then immediately dismisses the thought as petty. Pulling her hood over her head, she prepares to act. With determination in her eyes, she focuses on her goal. Standing before the Grand Gate Management Bureau, she decides she must create a situation forcing an investigation today. She resolves to cause a small commotion to achieve her goal. Her plan is to fake a collapse using her magical nausea, which will compel Benjamin to investigate all western-bound gates for a cause. Believing it's the fastest and simplest solution, Grace resolves to go through with it. She moves through the crowd, making her way toward the gate's magical source. She knows that the closer she gets to the magic, the stronger her body's negative reaction will become. As the feeling intensifies, she realizes with dread that it's far worse than she ever imagined. Overwhelmed by pain, she weakly calls for help as she stumbles. The pain triggers a traumatic childhood memory of her crying out in a forest. In the memory, shadowy siblings taunt young Grace, calling her dirty and a loser who will never be helped. As one tormentor dangles a worm over her, a young boy is seen watching from a distance. The boy turns away, showing no interest in helping her. Young Grace tearfully calls out for her brother Gilbert, pleading for him not to leave. As Gilbert walks away into the light, she reaches out, begging him not to abandon her. The woman who is now Grace wakes up in bed, realizing it was all a dream. Clutching her head, she understands it wasn't her own dream, but a memory of the original Grace's horrid childhood bullying. Staring at her reflection, she begins to second-guess herself, wondering if her plan was too rash. A memory flashes of Benjamin catching her as she fell, confirming she had been fine just moments before. She recalls telling him she felt nauseous and dizzy as she neared the gate, just before collapsing. Sitting up in shock, she realizes she didn't just fake a collapse, she actually passed out. She panics, realizing that while she was diagnosed with magical nausea, her reaction was far worse than planned, and she might be forbidden from going outside. Filled with regret, she admits she was too impatient but felt she had to act quickly to trigger the investigation. Sighing in frustration, she flops back onto her pillow. An internal voice cruelly calls her an idiot. The voice continues, mocking her for only now realizing the foolishness of her actions. The voice echoes in her mind, calling her useless. She pulls the covers over her head, hating that she hears these voices even when still, and noting it wasn't like this during the festival. Grace's thoughts spiral into confusion as she questions why they are so jumbled. Lying in bed, she feels useless and wonders what she can possibly trust anymore. Sunlight streams through a window as a faint tapping sound is heard. The persistent tapping startles Grace awake. She looks toward the window in disbelief, thinking it can't be possible. A hand slides the window open under a starry night sky. Grace peeks out of the open window, her expression filled with surprise. She wonders with a jolt if her late-night visitor could be Benjamin. Still looking out, she waits expectantly by the open window. The view from inside shows a blur of motion passing by the window frame. Grace sighs in relief, deciding the sound was just a tree branch hitting the glass. Feeling embarrassed, she concludes that she must have misheard. She leans against the windowsill, closing her eyes to enjoy the cool, quiet breeze. In the peaceful moment, she marvels at how high up she is. Suddenly, a man's panicked voice cries out, "Madam!" from the garden below. Startled by the shout, Grace's eyes fly open in shock. Benjamin looks up at her, warning her that it's dangerous and she should be resting after collapsing earlier, confirming he really is there. Her hand goes limp as she silently apologizes. Overcome with guilt, Grace regrets causing him trouble and wishes she hadn't pushed herself so hard. Benjamin smiles, changing the subject to her tea bags, explaining he's been buying them to send to the north, bringing tea to its people. He explains that while anyone could have had the idea, she was the one who actually made it a reality. Benjamin continues, stating that her actions will also ensure the orphanage remains well-funded for a long time. A small, warm smile touches Grace's lips as she processes Benjamin's praise. Blushing, she asks if that's really so, unable to stop the small spark of happiness she feels from his comforting words. Benjamin's expression shifts as a sudden thought occurs to him. He explains he just came from the Gate Management Bureau, as her previous concerns prompted him to start an inspection. Benjamin then apologizes for the impropriety, but asks if he can speak with her about the Saintess. Grace hesitates, nervously wondering if he means right now. Seeing her discomfort, Benjamin quickly backtracks, assuring her it's fine and they don't have to talk about it now. Grace leans forward, insisting that she wants to listen, but notes how awkward it is to talk from such a distance. She looks down and invites him to come up to her room. Benjamin's eye widens in surprise and delight as he eagerly accepts her invitation. Beaming with happiness, he announces that he will head to her room immediately. As she hears his footsteps fade, Grace watches him from her window. She closes the window with a quiet clunk. Her heart pounds as Grace chides herself, wondering why she just invited Benjamin into the private annex. Resigned, she accepts that it's too late to take back her invitation now. She nervously clutches the fabric of her nightgown. Catching her flustered reflection in the mirror, she wonders if she truly looks so disheveled. Panicked, Grace frantically wonders what she should do about her appearance. She looks at her reflection again, questioning why she's getting so worked up over this. She stammers a greeting as she hears him approaching. Benjamin opens the doors to her room. He greets her with a pleasant, "Good evening," but then questions why she isn't lying down to rest. Flustered, Grace explains that she can't lie down when a guest has arrived. Benjamin gently insists that it's fine for her to rest, reminding her that they are family. Her expression softens as she recalls a memory from her childhood. As they sit by her bed, Benjamin recounts how he suffered a terrible accident as a child, becoming so sick that his parents were distraught. He explains that after his miraculous recovery, the late Duke and Duchess became devout believers, convinced it was a miracle from God. In a memory, Benjamin asks if Grace befriended the Saintess for a specific reason, but she insists it was a personal one. Benjamin smiles warmly, saying he had hoped they could all visit the temple together someday. Grace internally questions his true motives, wondering if his interest in Arya is innocent or something more. A fond memory shows Grace encouraging a small, determined boy at the orphanage. The memory continues, with Grace and Benjamin discussing faith. They both see it as a comfort in difficult times. The next day, Grace and Benjamin walk together along a city street. Benjamin escorts a cheerful Grace, both of them enjoying their pleasant stroll. In a garden, Benjamin asks Grace to make him a promise. Sitting together on a bench, he first asks her to promise she won't go too far from him. He continues, saying second he wants to go with her, and then begins to state his third request. Benjamin gets her attention with a charming smile, simply saying her title. The focus shifts to the sparkling green brooch pinned to his coat. Grace turns to him with a gentle and warm smile. She reaches out, gently adjusting the ribbon on his collar. She notes the ribbon looks loose, and a blushing Benjamin is momentarily flustered as she offers to tighten it. Tap, tap, tap. An impatient sound interrupts the moment. Grace looks up, her expression turning to one of surprise. A panicked Cleta is seen rushing toward them, with an urgent look on her face. Grace calls out Cleta's name in concern, asking what's wrong as the frantic woman struggles to speak. Cleta breathlessly reports that she thinks there has been a break-in at the orphanage. You can learn about what to expect when arriving at your destination in the Your Trip section of the app. It provides information about your destination, including average temperatures, things to do, and local transportation options. Grace enters the orphanage to find a room completely ransacked and in disarray. A shocked voice expresses their disbelief at the scene. As they assess the damage, Grace suggests they sort through the mess, and Cleta agrees to get the other mothers. Benjamin asks Cleta if she's noticed any strange people nearby recently. He observes that despite the mess, there are no signs of a forced entry on the doors. Grace asks Benny if he sees anything suspicious, and he confirms the situation feels unusual. He turns to her seriously, saying there is something more important to address. He quietly suggests that she should get some rest. Seeing her confusion, he expresses concern for her well-being after her collapse at the gate a few days prior. As she stumbles slightly, he gently suggests she get some fresh air outside. Grace peeks out the door in disbelief, questioning if he is serious. Benjamin gives a reassuring smile as Grace finds herself surrounded by the orphanage's children. Grace happily invites the children to play together, and they cheer in response. Inside, the man takes charge of organizing the cleanup, introducing himself to Cleta as Lyndon. Lyndon confirms the safe wasn't touched, and deduces the culprit vandalized the place, but stole nothing and couldn't force entry. Lyndon stands in thought, carefully considering the clues. He contemplates the possibility of an inside job, questioning the motive for such destruction. Lyndon asks about the workshop, and Cleta confirms it was untouched because she kept it locked. He mentally lists the facts. The intruder knew how to get in, but not where the safe was, or how to open the workshop. As he mulls over the evidence, the silhouette of a man comes to mind. Lyndon narrows it down, believing there is only one possible suspect. Despite his suspicion, he feels something is off and decides to report the incident to the security forces. Outside, Grace watches over the children with a serene smile. A small child approaches Grace, whispering a secret that he's not supposed to tell anyone. The boy nervously asks if she'll believe him, trusting her because she's not one of the orphanage adults. Grace offers a kind, reassuring smile, encouraging him to speak. The child reveals a suspicious man came looking for her, but the children told him they knew nothing. He explains the man then threatened to have all the children scattered if they told any adults about him. Processing the child's warning, Grace realizes with horror that someone is actively investigating her true identity. Overcome with panic, she runs through the orphanage corridors, calling out for Benny. Benjamin and Cleta turn in alarm, asking Grace what is wrong. Announcing a new problem she must handle, Grace asks to leave for the day, and Benjamin immediately permits it. Benjamin apologizes for keeping her while she was unwell, but she insists it's fine and promises to help find the culprit later. Seated alone with a cup of tea, Grace decides she needs to step away from her work at the orphanage for the time being. Benjamin looks concerned, asking her if she didn't enjoy her time there. Grace explains that the children told her a scary man was asking questions, and she suspects it's a reporter who will only be replaced by others if caught. Benjamin confirms her suspicion that a reporter infiltrated the orphanage, which she affirms. He quickly deduces that the reporter must have had an accomplice, suggesting the former orphanage director. Grace recalls the director who absconded with the orphanage's funds. Benjamin theorizes the reporter learned of the runaway director's existence and sought him out for information. The narrative shifts to information provided by Cleta. Cleta explains that the money used to be kept in a now unused room, which belonged to the previous director. Grace concludes the director ransacked the house, looking for the safe before fleeing, and Benjamin expresses relief that its location had been changed. Grace slyly suggests she could investigate the reporter alone at night, but Benjamin shuts her down with a firm absolutely not. He sternly reminds her that she collapsed less than a month ago, and such a risk is out of the question. A man identified as Tom Birkin, a reporter, sits in an alley, driven to relentlessly pursue Grace out of a desperate need for money. He peers from his hiding spot, frustrated that he had to coax the director into letting him in, only to find Grace's schedule unpredictable. He is stunned to see a figure in a navy blue cloak emerge, realizing it's Grace going out alone. Seeing she has no escort, Tom Birkin debates whether he should follow her. Deciding guilt doesn't pay the bills, he resolves to follow, needing only to get a look at her face. He reaches out to grab her shoulder, intending to intimidate her for a moment. His hand makes contact with her shoulder. Before he can act, a blade is drawn with swift, determined purpose. A knight in uniform blocks his path, identifying herself as Deputy Commander Roselia Vantrin of the Felton Duchy's Second Night Order. With her sword pointed at him, Roselia declares she is arresting him for the crime of threatening the Duchess. A promotional logo marks the end of the scene. The story shifts to the exterior of a grand ducal estate under a starry sky. Roselia Vantrin reports that she has successfully completed her mission and returned. Grace, accompanied by a maid, smiles and praises Roselia for a job well done. Roselia apologizes profusely for having dropped the cloak. Grace lent her during the confrontation. Grace reassures her that the cloak can be cleaned and that Roselia's safety was the only thing that mattered. After acknowledging Grace's kindness, Roselia states she has something else to report. She presents a box containing items confiscated from Tom Birkin, confirming he carried no dangerous magical items. Grace formally thanks Knight Vantrin for bringing the confiscated belongings to her. Roselia humbly replies that it is simply her duty. Standing proudly, Roselia asserts that, since the order came directly from Grace, it was only right to report back to her personally. Awed, Grace and the maid admire Roselia's incredible competence and presence. The maid explains that as one of the Empire's best female knights, Roselia likely considered the task a great honor. Grace reflects on this, hoping it wasn't a burden, and admitting she envies Roselia's unwavering strength, unlike her own. In a dark prison cell, Tom Birkin resigns himself to his fate, certain he will be tortured and killed without a trial. He laments that while the Duchess is rumored to be foolish, she is still the Duchess, and he hopes his death won't be too painful. He looks up in shock as a veiled figure in black approaches his cell. His eyes widen in utter disbelief as he recognizes the visitor. He stammers, asking if she is really the infamous Duchess of Felton. Grace calmly confirms her identity and warns him to behave, lest she call the knights. Tom Birkin realizes the rumors about her were greatly exaggerated as she drops a small pouch into his cell. Tom Birkin thinks to himself that the Duchess is nothing like the rumors, wondering if she's actually a stand-in. Holding a stack of his reports, Grace informs Tom Birkin that she has read his detailed investigation of her. He sweats nervously, then asks with a defiant smirk if she's here to hold him accountable for his crimes. Grace turns away, stating that while he will stand trial, his punishment is set to be far harsher than his crimes warrant. She presents a small, folded paper as she begins her proposal. Grace offers him an opportunity, which he repeats in disbelief. She explains that if he accepts her offer, he'll avoid a life sentence, prompting him to laugh and ask if she's threatening him. Grace scoffs, retorting that a man who mocks others for a living has no room to speak of threats. With a chilling certainty, she trusts he's smart enough not to betray her, warning him about the fate of traitorous dogs. Tom Birkin laughs nervously, admitting the rumors about her incompetence were false and acknowledging her boldness and skill. He reflects that she's a keen judge of character and not the type to be a subject of mere gossip. A gloved hand suddenly grips his chin with a firm grasp. Defeated, Tom Birkin sits in his cell and asks what she needs him to do. Walking through a grand hall, Grace feels satisfied that she has successfully established an informant. She muses that she can now uncover secrets the original plot never revealed, but decides to focus on immediate tasks first. Grace recalls the valuable information she gave Tom Birkin. The information detailed the whereabouts of the legendary Blessing of the Sun necklace, passed down by saints. Since the temple stopped displaying the necklace, its disappearance sparked speculation, making its location irresistible to a reporter. Tapping her finger on the windowsill, Grace feels thankful for her knowledge of the original story, predicting Tom Birkin will use the information at his trial. She grips the windowsill, her plan now in motion. Lying on her bed, she reminds herself that she still needs to find the runaway orphanage director. At his desk, Benjamin resolves to launch a full investigation after dealing with Tom Birkin, ensuring the director is punished. He vows to make sure the corrupt director can never approach the orphanage again. Benjamin decides to transfer full ownership of the orphanage to Cleta, who is pictured happily with the children. Feeling better than usual, Grace closes her eyes, wishing she could always feel this way. Her peaceful thoughts are invaded by a vision of ghostly hands reaching for her in the darkness. As she feels herself falling, a spark of defiance ignites within her, and she believes she can overcome it. An ominous voice warns that she will fail soon, and she realizes with a gasp who is speaking. She sits bolt upright in bed, eyes wide with fierce determination, and declares, "I am not Grace." She catches her breath, realizing it was a nightmare she can no longer remember. The scene shifts to a bright, sunlit garden. Benjamin stands before her, looking concerned as he asks if she is all right. Grace explains she was out for a walk and was momentarily lost in thought, remembering the previous night's events. Closing her eyes with a smile, she apologizes for worrying him and asks what they were discussing. Benjamin nervously adjusts his cravat, admitting it's not the best time for leisure, but asks for a favor. With an inviting smile, he asks if she would care to accompany him on an outing. Grace looks at him in surprise, tentatively asking where they would go. He suggests exploring the outskirts of the capital, making her wonder if he's doing this out of concern for her mood. Clasping her hands together, she shyly agrees to his invitation. A pleased, blushing Benjamin offers to escort her to the annex. As she walks, Grace questions his offer, reminding herself his kindness is merely pity and that she must remember her place. She steels her resolve, determined not to forget the circumstances of their relationship. An attendant interrupts, presenting a letter to Benjamin and informing him of an urgent matter. Taking the letter, Benjamin smiles and tells Grace to take her time preparing, since they're near the annex. She promises to be quick, but he reassures her there's no need to rush. A simple carriage makes its way through a sun-dappled forest path. Inside, Benjamin explains that he arranged a simple carriage and hopes she finds it comfortable. Grace assures him it's fine and asks about their destination. Benjamin tells her they are visiting the flower house on the outskirts, formerly managed by a marchioness. He describes the beautiful glass greenhouse, explaining its warm interior allows various flowers to bloom. Benjamin smiles gently, remarking that Grace has always been fond of flowers. Noticing his expression, Grace asks if something is bothering him. He sighs, admitting that she's right and revealing there's an issue with the Rondell Canal. The scene shifts to a picturesque city with a beautiful, wide canal. Benjamin explains that a large magic artifact workshop is suspected of affecting the canal. A grand, ornate building stands beside the shimmering canal water. Benjamin dismisses it as an absurd accusation, but states his plan to stop by after their outing as the carriage clatters along. Grace thinks his priorities seem off and suggests they visit the Rondell Canal together today instead. Surprised, Benjamin expresses concern that she would have to be in a crowded area. Grace smiles confidently, saying she will be fine with him by her side to keep people away. Benjamin chuckles, agreeing with her logic and instructing the driver to redirect the carriage to the Rondell Canal. A thump sounds as they arrive, and Benjamin announces they can step down from the carriage. He explains that the temple is conducting purification work, though it's only a temporary fix until the cause is found. Benjamin adds that the temple members possess a certain amount of divine power themselves. Grace looks on, taking in the scene with a thoughtful expression. 3 robed figures greet Benjamin and inquire about the person with him. Benjamin introduces Grace as his wife, privately thinking everyone will be disappointed by her presence. Panic sets in as Grace holds his hand, thinking she should have stayed hidden and wanting to run away to avoid embarrassing Benjamin. A bright light marks a transition in the bustling city scene. The sound of footsteps approaches. A woman in a white hooded robe walks toward them as Grace and Benjamin watch. The woman states that she heard the Rondell Canal was contaminated again. Now revealed, the beautiful white-haired woman asks if the magic artifact workshop will be all right. Grace stares in wide-eyed shock, a look of recognition on her face. The 2 women stand near each other by the canal. A title card identifies the woman as Arya Miller, a saintess with unparalleled divine power. Arya stands before a glowing celestial symbol, her immense power radiating outward. A temple member quickly warns Arya not to release her divine power, as it could disrupt the magical workshop, and she apologizes. Grace realizes she forgot that magical devices and divine power are incompatible. Benjamin turns to Grace with a sly look, asking if she wants to say something to the saintess, but she quickly denies it. He says he only wanted to introduce them but notes that Arya seems busy, musing that the contamination recurred despite her efforts. Grace suggests looking elsewhere for the cause, but a temple member confirms they've already investigated other areas with no success. The narration notes that the fact the issue has resurfaced recently is significant. Grace knows from the original story that the source of the problem is in the West, and thinks the recurrence likely means it's far away. She wonders how she can subtly guide them to investigate the West without revealing what she knows. A flash of light emanates from Arya as she prepares to act. Arya holds her hands out, gathering her divine energy. Grace gasps as an idea suddenly strikes her. Smiling brightly, Grace proposes that since the saintess has wide-ranging abilities, she could try to read the direction of the corruption. Intrigued, Benjamin asks her to elaborate on how that would work. Grace explains that since the contamination spreads through rivers, they could use holy power to trace it upstream like a thread. She continues, theorizing that an extended form of the power would naturally seek out the contamination, saving time and manpower. Benjamin is left utterly speechless by her brilliant suggestion. A satisfied smile spreads across his face. Benjamin proudly announces that his wise wife has an interesting idea, causing Grace to panic internally. He considers how her suggestion will be a great help to the busy saintess. Grace quickly interjects, insisting Benjamin could explain it better and claiming she is tired and wants to rest in the carriage. She puts on a big smile, hoping her excuse is convincing enough for Benjamin to understand. Looking slightly dejected, Benjamin agrees that it's unfortunate, but offers to escort her back to the carriage. A click is heard as Grace steps onto the carriage step. Back in the carriage, Grace steadies herself with a hand on her dress. Looking out the window, she admits to herself that she is genuinely tired. She watches Benjamin speak with Arya, a thoughtful expression on her face. Her mind pictures them surrounded by flowers, thinking they look almost like a couple. Grace reflects that she feels surprisingly numb, as if she can't hear or feel anything, unlike how she normally would. A hand gently brushes through her hair, rousing her. A voice calls out to her as she begins to wake. Startled, Grace sits up and asks Benjamin if he has finished his work. Benjamin smiles, confirming that her tracking method worked, though Arya said it would take more time. He explains he persuaded the others by reminding them that the saintess is there to protect everyone equally. As Grace sleeps, Benjamin notes they can still visit the flower house, but is interrupted by a man urgently calling for them. Both startled, they look out the window as Benjamin asks what's wrong. A man reports a fire at the orphanage Grace used to frequent, causing her to gasp in shock and insist they go immediately. Benjamin agrees they must hurry and tells Grace she can accompany him. Arriving at the scene, Grace stares in horror at the burning building, hoping there are no major problems. She watches helplessly as flames consume the orphanage. A guard informs Benjamin that a fire broke out, causing minor injuries but no deaths, and that it doesn't seem like an accident. The guard identifies a collapsed man as the prime suspect, since only women and children live at the orphanage. Benjamin examines the unconscious suspect, noting he's in no condition to speak. A young woman with a soot-stained face approaches, and Benjamin recognizes her as Cleta Den. Visibly shaken, Cleta nervously asks Benjamin if she can ask him something. After he agrees, she reveals the suspect is the former headmaster and that she doesn't know how he snuck inside. Cleta explains that he started the fire in the oil storage room and, strangely, never tried to escape. She suggests he may have given up on life, but adds that he said something odd before losing consciousness. Cleta looks deeply troubled as she recalls the man's last words. Her expression is filled with fear and uncertainty. She pauses, hesitating to reveal the chilling information. Cleta reveals the headmaster claimed the fire was revenge against Benjamin and Grace, leaving Grace stunned. Horrified, Grace mutters the word revenge in disbelief. She internally seethes with rage, furious that the director ignored her warning to stay still. Her mind shatters with frustration, echoing the word idiot. Grace is overcome with despair, her face shadowed by the terrible news. Benjamin gently puts his arms around her, telling her it's time to go home. As Benjamin comforts Grace, an off-screen voice wonders aloud about the revenge being against the Duchess. Someone speculates about other nearby ducal families being the target. A dreadful thought strikes Grace as she denies the possibility in terror. Trembling, she grabs Benjamin's arm for support, and he calmly responds. He gently encourages her to speak slowly, as she shakily asks if he can provide a place for the orphanage residents to stay. Benjamin agrees without hesitation, thinking to himself that he expected such a considerate request from his wife. Grace murmurs worriedly about finding a safe place for everyone. Benjamin consoles her as they walk away from the scene under the moonlight. The scene transitions from the moonlit night to the grand ducal estate. In a nightmare, a disembodied voice taunts Grace, calling her foolish, worthless, and complicit. She wakes with a gasp, clutching her chest and wondering if the fire was her fault too. Grace clutches her head, overwhelmed by a throbbing pain. A maid enters the room, asking if she has awakened. Grace explains it's hard to move and asks for an update. The maid reports that guests from the orphanage have arrived. Understanding immediately, Grace instructs the maid to prepare the tea room for their guests. Grace then asks the maid to summon Cleta, explaining she needs to discuss something urgent with her. The maid bows respectfully, assuring Grace that she will take care of everything. Now alone in her room, Grace sits up in bed, her expression filled with quiet resolve. A soft rustle sounds as she determinedly slips her feet into a pair of slippers. Grace reflects on how her efforts for the orphanage seem to have turned against her, admitting she's scared to face them and their possible resentment. Her gaze hardens with determination as she realizes she will regret it for the rest of her life if she runs away from her duties. She firms her resolve, deciding she must change, no matter how much fear she feels. In an ornate tea room, Grace calls out to her guest, Cleta. Grace formally introduces herself as Grace Felton, warmly thanking Cleta for coming, despite the difficult circumstances. Flustered, Cleta quickly insists it's not uncomfortable at all, expressing immense gratitude for Grace's help with their housing. Grace gently asks if Cleta is aware of the rumors surrounding yesterday's fire, as dark, distorted figures appear in her mind. Cleta shouts in outrage, declaring that she doesn't believe it for a second. Cleta passionately defends Grace, stating the rumors describe a completely different person from the Duchess, who has always cared for them, even arranging this safe place. With a relieved smile, Grace tells Cleta she understands, and not to worry about it. Cleta clenches her fist, admitting that no one is truly okay, and that her co-workers have also faced their share of prejudice. She recalls her friends from the orphanage, stating that they couldn't just casually talk about Grace. Cleta explains that because she wanted to make things right, she spoke with everyone first. Grace listens with a solemn expression as Cleta continues to speak. Blushing with admiration, Cleta declares that Grace is their benefactor and that they don't believe the word revenge for even a moment. Beaming brightly, Cleta offers her complete support, telling Grace to ask for anything and promising to do all she can to help. A gentle smile touches Grace's lips as she looks down, moved by the heartfelt declaration. Looking up with purpose, Grace begins to explain her request. The narration reveals Cleta accepted the request, and Grace arranged for them to have a new dwelling with a tea garden, hoping their business prospers. Together, the women from the orphanage will now support each other and find pride in their new work. Later, Benjamin informs Grace that her tracking method was extremely effective, allowing them to pinpoint the source of the Western contamination with the Saintess's help. He turns to her, adding that he owes it to the Saintess for helping him see the new approach. Benjamin looks at Grace with genuine admiration, telling her she's remarkable and that no one else could have thought of her idea. Flustered by the praise, Grace blushes and thinks to herself how strange it feels to receive such recognition. Grace gets his attention, and he encourages her to speak her mind. She nervously asks if she might be able to join the mission to the contaminated area. Benjamin's expression turns serious as he warns that the mission could be dangerous and he's not sure her health can handle it. Grace insists she's just frustrated and needs fresh air, promising not to be a burden and expressing her desire to help. She internally admits it's more than an excuse. She realizes she must take action herself to fix her damaged reputation. She clasps her hands together, anxiously wondering if Benjamin will grant her request. After a moment of thought, Benjamin smirks and agrees to her wishes, saying he wants to show her something anyway. Feeling relieved, Grace thanks her maid Sally. Sally replies that Knight Vanton will be an excellent escort, and he assures Grace no one will harm her. As they depart, narration explains Duke Linden's scholarly work on a holy relic, and Grace's hope that this mission helps her reclaim her memories. A carriage wheel spins as they arrive at the desolate site, and Grace covers her mouth, horrified by how awful the contamination is. Benjamin declares the distribution of relief supplies is the priority. An attendant reports that their site has already been investigated. The attendant mentions that geologists are present because the contaminated land might harbor rare plants, an idea that piques Benjamin's interest. Grace reveals her true goal is a closed mining town, knowing that after Arya purifies it, the people there won't know who saved them. A geologist confirms they are looking for rare plants near the mine and hands Grace a book with a ribbon to mark her path. Under the moonlight, Grace studies a map showing that contamination is as bad as expected. Benjamin's voice suddenly calls out to her. Benjamin asks if she has time tonight, clarifying he means for reconnaissance, which startles her. Though momentarily disappointed, Grace brightly agrees to wait for him until dawn, saying she has something important to discuss. Benjamin agrees to finish quickly and find her, telling her to sleep if he's late, leaving Grace slightly confused as she nods. Grace explains she tied a glowing ribbon to mark their path, and a surprised Benjamin asks if it's a new magic tool. She reveals it's coated with luminous paint that seems to glow brighter in complete darkness, musing on its potential if they can improve it. Benjamin reflects that while some see business-mindedness as negative, temples and unions operate similarly on donations and taxes. As they walk through the dark woods, Benjamin suddenly stops her and she asks what's wrong. He says he thought he saw a faint glow nearby and asks her to wait while he investigates, reaching down toward a shimmering blue object on the ground. Benjamin compares the glowing object to a gemstone, but Grace is startled when he suddenly shouts her name and reaches for her. Grace realizes Benjamin's shrewd plan to pass the costs onto the imperial court, thinking he's more complex than he appears. Benjamin asks if she has a plan, and Grace internally laments that he is so capable, unlike her. Overwhelmed by the excess supplies, Grace notes this event wasn't in the original story. A man suggests offering additional gifts, and she agrees. Grace mentally identifies a handsome man with long white hair as Boris Benedict. Her heart sinks as she realizes that if Boris is present, then the Saintess Arya has also arrived. She recalls that in the story, Boris was Arya's unwavering supporter and protector, even though he wasn't the main lead. Snapped from her thoughts, Grace is addressed by a confused Boris, who asks, Duchess. Boris smiles reassuringly, informing Grace that they received gifts from Duke Zarte, but that there are no other major issues. Grace explains they will accept a few gifts out of respect, but plan to use them to help the people suffering from the severe contamination. Impressed, Boris tells Grace that she is a truly kind person. He offers his future assistance, and a slightly flustered Grace agrees to count on him. This interaction triggers a memory as a woman frantically searches her desk, wondering where a document has gone. The woman, revealed to be Arya, looks panicked as she confirms an incident has occurred and something is missing. Grace and Sally notice a growing commotion as temple knights and priests gather nearby. Grace approaches to inquire about the disturbance, and a knight informs them that the Saintess's belongings have been stolen. Shocked by this event that wasn't in the original story, Grace asks the knight to specify what was taken. The knight reveals Duke Zart's gifts are missing and expresses concern that the Duke might feel insulted by the situation. Grace realizes this turn of events is entirely new as she watches an upset Arya nearby. Arya clenches her fist, determinedly asking if there is any way she can help resolve the situation. The knight restrains Arya and shocks Grace by announcing he has orders to search the Duchess's quarters. Sally furiously steps in front of Grace, shouting at the knight for disrespectfully suspecting her madam. Vantrin confronts the knight, accusing him of unfairly targeting Grace without searching any other locations first. Sally tries to de-escalate the situation, telling Vantrin it's all right. Vantrin ignores her, demanding that the knight apologize to Grace if the search of her quarters yields nothing. The knight condescendingly agrees, just as a voice from inside the tent announces that they've found the stolen item. A knight emerges holding a beautiful blue necklace, confirming it's the gift the saintess received. Grace stares in disbelief, realizing with horror that she has been framed as the culprit. The crowd murmurs about a similar past incident as a knight demands an explanation from the Duchess. Grace denies any knowledge, stating she was distributing food but knows her words will sound like a weak excuse to outsiders. Just as panic sets in, Benjamin's voice cuts through, gently commanding her to look at him. With unwavering conviction, Benjamin tells Grace that he believes in her and encourages her to speak her mind freely. Moved by his support, Grace feels her fear subside, realizing she has allies she can count on. A spark of an idea hits her as she realizes a thief would have to touch the stolen item, and she proposes they test that theory. Grace confidently instructs a surprise Sally to bring her the powder, and Sally immediately obeys. She calmly asks the knight to see the jewelry box, promising she will not break it. Grace hands the box to Benjamin for safekeeping, noting that none of her party has touched it. Holding a dusting brush, Grace explains that if she is guilty, there should be evidence, but if contrary proof emerges, she warns her accusers with a sly smile that they had better start thinking of an excuse. With a flourish, she begins dusting the stolen necklace for fingerprints. Grace explains to Benjamin that since no one was wearing gloves and a new gift would be polished, any prints found now must belong to the thief. Relieved that her method is working, she educates a skeptical priest about the unique patterns on fingertips called fingerprints. Looking at her own finger, she points out the pattern and declares, "There it is." Grace explains that leaving a fingerprint requires bare hands, recalling the image of the culprit's hand. She points directly at the skeptical priest, suggesting he would know, and he sputters that her accusation is ridiculous. Unfazed, Grace proposes they compare the prints on the necklace to his to see if it's truly ridiculous. She declares that if the marks match, she will consider him the culprit and file a formal complaint, leaving him pale with fear. Afterward, the matter is resolved quickly as Priest Boris brings the guilty man to apologize to Grace. However, the narration reveals Boris showed an indifferent attitude, subtly emphasizing the temple's superior prestige before departing. A dark-haired man asks Arya if they can leave now that it's settled, but stops when he sees her shocked expression. The dark-haired man notices Arya's pale face and asks what's wrong, while she thinks about the man who just left. He and Arya watch from a distance as Grace departs. Arya closes her eyes and offers a serene, gentle smile. Taking her hand, a man tells Sylvie it is time to go. He gently leads her away from the gathering. Grace walks on as narration reveals that, in the original story, Arya and Sylvester met by the lake on this night. Now in a forest, Grace wonders how a lake can exist in a dead land, realizing it means Arya's purification has unlimited potential. She follows the scent of water, confirming there is a lake nearby. In the moonlight, two figures sit by a shimmering, magical lake, a scene straight from the novel. Hiding with Benjamin, Grace remarks that the pair looks like protagonists. He agrees, then startles her by asking why she's out so late. By the water, the man and the white-haired woman share an intimate, smiling gaze. As Grace watches them, Benjamin quietly admits he envies them, which startles her. A gasp escapes her as she suddenly recalls a bitter, lonely line from Benjamin in the novel. She instinctively grabs his sleeve to get his attention. Turning to Benjamin, she asks if she might greet the Saintess. A blushing Benjamin happily agrees and says they should go immediately. Relieved, Grace laughs to herself, wondering if she was overthinking his feelings. Benjamin announces he is removing a perception-blocking magic tool, causing a startled reaction from the couple by the lake. Both Sylvester and the Saintess are shocked by their sudden appearance, with the Saintess stammering in confusion. Benjamin apologizes for disturbing them, claiming he was just taking a walk. Sylvester looks flustered, recognizing Benjamin and calling him brother. The Saintess urgently asks them to stay a little longer, surprised by their welcoming attitude. Grace realizes she has something she'd like to discuss with them. Grace asks Benjamin for permission to speak with the Saintess privately, and he agrees, but tells her not to wander too far. Approaching the water's edge, Grace formally introduces herself. Grace expresses her regret for not meeting the Saintess sooner, but is glad they could connect on their last night. The Saintess blushes and eagerly agrees, confessing she's wanted to get closer to Grace, leaving her surprised. The Saintess explains she's long wanted to befriend Grace, who confusedly asks for the reason. Looking serious, the Saintess says it might sound strange, but she feels it's an important discussion. The Saintess reveals that Grace's condition looks similar to that of Sylvie, the Crown Prince, leaving Grace utterly confused. A flashback shows the Saintess arriving at the Rondel Canal. She recalls using her divine power to purify the contaminated water. In that moment of purification, she was surrounded by a bloom of flowers. Grace's shocked face appears in the memory of that day. The Saintess explains that she saw the black mist surrounding Grace disperse at that moment. Grace is horrified, connecting the black mist to the curse on Sylvester from the novel, and wondering if she is also cursed. The Saintess notes that while the mist vanished then, it has returned, and she senses an energy from Grace similar to her own. Shocked, Grace connects the dots, asking if the Saintess means she possesses divine power. The Saintess is stunned by Grace's immediate conclusion. Grace quickly dismisses the idea as impossible, stating that only one Saintess is born per generation. The Saintess quietly agrees, saying she thought so as well. She then apologizes for bringing up such a strange topic. Grace is left reeling from the shocking revelation. She reflects that the Saintess is just as pure and kind-hearted as the novel described, even apologizing for her own confusion. The Saintess admits she told no one else, feeling Grace should know. Moved, Grace suggests they head back. The Saintess agrees, but shyly adds that she hopes they can meet again. She beams, eagerly repeating that she'd love to see Grace again, as Grace processes the terrifying thought. So, Grace was cursed? As she walks away, Grace's head throbs as she questions the true nature of the medicine she has been taking. She laments that she seems to be facing one problem after another. The scene transitions to a grand train station, their destination being the Linden Viscountcy. A maid arrives with the morning newspaper for Grace. Grace smiles and thanks the maid, calling her Sally. While reading, Grace notices there's no news about Duchess Felton and wonders why. Her attention is drawn to the only prominent story, a recent kidnapping case. A maid presents Grace with the newspaper as she rests on a sofa. Grace's eyes narrow as she focuses on an article about a kidnapping case. After reading the article, she reflects on how frightening the world truly is. Benjamin informs Grace they are about to arrive at Linden Viscountcy, and she agrees to prepare. The scene reveals a quaint and sprawling town, nestled in a green valley. Narration describes the location as a small territory with a beautiful lake. The text dismisses it as an ordinary territory, apart from a dubious legend about its lake curing any illness. They arrive at the grand entrance gate of a large, castle-like estate. Standing on the grounds, Grace feels a wave of nausea and emotion, recognizing this as the land her body's original owner loved. She looks visibly distressed as Benjamin stands stoically beside her. Noticing her unease, Benjamin gently suggests they take a look around the local marketplace. He explains merchants stay for an extended festival season that residents enjoy, and Grace agrees it must be much smaller than the capital's events. He teases that it's still livelier than the Northern Nights, prompting Grace to call him unfair. The two of them stroll through the lively and crowded town marketplace. Grace is intrigued by the unusual items for sale when something specific catches her eye. Her gaze lands on a vendor's stall featuring bright red berries and small potted plants. She approaches a merchant and asks him about the unfamiliar fruit. The merchant explains the fruit is a southern specialty, and Grace asks if she can try one. The merchant agrees, but as Grace eats a berry, Benjamin panics, asking if she's okay while she feels a strange jolt. Stunned, Grace recognizes the fruit as Chisandra and wonders why it exists here. Feeling like she's in the wrong story, a worried Benjamin asks if she's alright, but a blushing Grace reassures him that she actually likes it. He remains concerned, asking if she's certain the fruit isn't harmful. Benjamin suddenly grabs the merchant, declaring he'll buy all the fruit, shocking Grace. He offers to purchase the saplings as well, and asks Grace if there is anything else she'd like to buy. With a charming smile, Benjamin suggests she call him by a different title during the festival. Flustered, Grace hesitates before timidly suggesting the name Benny. In a cute, stylized panel, Benjamin happily exclaims, "Yes, I am Benny." Playing along, Grace asks if she can buy one more thing, and he happily agrees. With a dramatic flourish, Grace gestures toward a grand mansion, announcing she'll buy it. A woman, identified as Viscountess Linden and Grace's mother, welcomes them with a knowing smile. As they arrive with their luggage and purchases, Viscountess Linden encourages them to enjoy the evening. She greets Grace coolly, remarking that it's been a while, and noting her daughter's continued love for flowers. Grace nervously accepts the greeting and asks to delay dinner, which her mother permits, sending them to their room. In the hallway, Grace pauses to look at an old family portrait hanging on the wall. She notes the portrait is outdated and reflects on feeling inferior next to her beautiful siblings. The portrait shows a stern-looking family, with Grace appearing somber and detached. She acknowledges that her discomfort with her family stems from a deep-seated inferiority complex. Being led down a corridor, Grace tells herself to stop thinking and just follow along. She stops in her tracks, a sudden, worried realization dawning on her. She panics internally, realizing they've been given only one room with a single bed, while Benjamin looks secretly pleased. With a sly, knowing smile, Viscountess Linden tells them to make themselves comfortable. Inside the room, both Grace and Benjamin stand together, blushing profusely. A flustered Benjamin clears his throat and offers to request another room if she feels uncomfortable. Blushing, Grace quickly declines, suggesting there's probably a shortage of rooms. She continues to rationalize the situation, stating that the Viscount's estate isn't very large. Benjamin, still blushing intensely, nervously stammers as he suggests an alternative arrangement. Inside their room, Grace looks flustered and confused. Benjamin stands rigidly and declares that he shall sleep on the sofa. Grace argues the sofa is too narrow, but Benjamin, already lounging with a smirk, insists it's just right. With a playful smile, Grace assures him there's no need to measure. Benjamin cheekily agrees that her words are always correct and accepts the sofa. Grace suddenly objects, worried he'll strain his body, but Benjamin reminds her she was the one who initially offered to take it, leaving her to ponder a new solution. Poof. Mortified and blushing, Grace's chibi forms steams with embarrassment over her unspoken idea. The idea is to share the bed. Benjamin quickly agrees, shocking Grace, who thinks it's impossible even for a married couple and immediately regrets her suggestion. Desperate to change the subject, Grace suggests they go eat before Sally arrives, and they awkwardly hurry out of the room. At dinner, a blonde woman criticizes Grace for neglecting her health and warns her not to eat dessert lest she gain weight. Narration reveals this woman is Grace's mother, who often made such cutting remarks, supposedly for Grace's own good. The memory leaves a bitter taste in Grace's mouth, but she resolves to ignore it to avoid appearing too sensitive. Benjamin smoothly interjects that a day with family must be a joy, adding that he looks forward to their first meal together after hearing praise for the household. A flashback shows Benjamin overhearing the mother's comment and firing back, but in the present, the tension gives Grace an upset stomach. Later that night, outside the Grand Viscount estate, Grace clutches her abdomen in pain. She walks down a hallway, lamenting that the stressful dinner prevented her from eating properly. A hand rests on her shoulder as a woman's voice asks if something is wrong. Grace's mind is made up. She needs to have someone investigate Baron Lemonetti. A young woman asks Grace who the Baron is, reminding her that her husband is the Earl of Farmer. A flashback shows a younger version of the woman grabbing a young Grace's hand, menacingly telling her she's clever enough to understand. In the present, the woman Gloria embraces Grace, admitting she's frightened and agrees they must investigate the matter she brought up. Grace later tells Benjamin she wishes to resume her social activities and asks to use Marquis Charles's connections, which piques his curiosity. She explains she met the Marquis during an embarrassing time and blushes, begging Benjamin not to inquire further. Grace pivots, mentioning Marquis Charles's wife is pregnant and will be hosting a baby shower soon. A silhouette of a pregnant noblewoman appears as the purpose of a baby shower is explained. Grace asks if her sister Gloria might be invited, and Benjamin says it's unlikely, as Gloria's husband has no connection to the Marquis. Grace clenches her fist, her plan working perfectly. With newfound determination, Grace decides she's now curious about her sister's husband. Benjamin states that while he doesn't know Gloria's husband well, he is grateful for his support of Crown Prince Sylvester, with whom Benjamin is close. After processing this, Grace pivots again, asking what he knows about Baron Lemonetti. Benjamin admits he's never heard the name before, guessing he's a rural noble, as Grace confesses she only just learned of him herself. Grace laughs and entrusts the gathering to Benjamin, but inwardly she worries that this unknown, suspicious noble might be too much for her to handle. On the final day at the Viscount's estate, an incident occurs as Benjamin walks toward the main doors. Checking his watch, Benjamin notes that Grace is running a bit late. An attendant named Abel approaches, and Benjamin acknowledges him. A man and woman burst in frantically, the man shouting that something terrible has happened. The man reveals Grace has been kidnapped, and Benjamin's expression turns dark as he asks for clarification. The scene transitions with a foreboding, dark texture. In disbelief, Benjamin asks if they are truly telling him his lady was kidnapped directly from the estate. The Viscount confirms a threatening letter was delivered, but he's unsure of the reason for the kidnapping. Benjamin is shown a ransom note composed of mismatched, cut-out letters. Abel observes that the letters were cut from a newspaper and pasted together. Benjamin grimly studies the note, confirming Abel's assessment. When Benjamin asks to seal the Viscounty, The Viscount nervously explains that it might be difficult. Abel steps forward, sternly demanding to know the reason for his hesitation. The Viscount flinches, looking panicked. The Viscount explains that external merchants are passing through, and sealing the borders without explanation would destroy the Viscounty's reputation. Benjamin thoughtfully considers the situation and concedes that the Viscount's reasoning makes sense. The Viscount adds that the kidnappers demand 10 million zen, a sum the Viscounty cannot afford to pay. Benjamin declares the Felton Duchy will pay the ransom, but in exchange, the Viscount must grant him a different request. His request is simple. He wishes to borrow the uniform of a castle gate guard. Grace awakens blindfolded and bound in a cramped, dark space, wondering where she is. She realizes her hands, feet, and mouth are covered, the horrifying truth dawning on her. She's been kidnapped. Feeling hazy and suspecting she was drugged, Grace immediately questions if Baron Lemonetti is responsible. She tells herself not to hope for rescue, recalling that in all her past lives, death was always the outcome. The scene shifts to the Viscounty gates, where covered wagons are lined up to depart. Disguised as a guard, Benjamin informs a carriage driver they must search his wagon for a thief. The driver nonchalantly agrees. Benjamin thanks the driver while Abel watches from the side, inwardly trusting that there is a plan in motion. Abel nervously admits to himself that he has absolutely no idea what Benjamin's plan could possibly be. A merchant complains loudly about the inconvenience, taking a swig from a bottle and demanding compensation. He grows more agitated, demanding to be let through, and Benjamin, still in disguise, calmly agrees. Annoyed by the hassle, the man takes another drink before pointedly flicking something onto the ground with a clatter. Abel rushes to Benjamin's side to ask if he's all right, but Benjamin confirms he's fine and addresses him as Abel Burton. Benjamin removes his guard helmet, his identity now revealed. Turning to an officer, he orders Sir Roselia Van Treen to pursue the carriage, declaring that his wife is inside. Clatter! Inside the dark carriage, Grace lies bound next to several bottles as her hairpin rests on the floorboards, the dropped clue. Abel urgently relays the order to Roselia Van Treen, who confirms she understands and will pursue the carriage. After thanking Abel for delivering the message, Benjamin announces he is taking his leave. A baffled Abel asks where he is going. Benjamin smiles serenely, stating he is returning to the manor. He explains that the driver was only a decoy, and the real culprit must be caught quickly as Roselia Van Treen gives chase. Still confused, Abel asks why Benjamin is returning to the Viscount's estate if the culprit is escaping. With a determined glint in his eye, Benjamin reveals he intends to meet the true culprit for a personal talk. The scene transitions back to the Viscount's grand estate. Inside a lavish room, Benjamin calmly tells the Viscount and his wife that their conversation shouldn't be long. Benjamin presents documents pertaining to a mine Grace helped them acquire, noting its profits far exceed the ransom demand. He confidently states he will rescue Grace, making the ransom unnecessary, as the Viscount and his wife sweat nervously. Crackle! Benjamin crushes the documents in his hand, his demeanor turning icy cold as the couple flinches. With a piercing glare, Benjamin drops all pretense and asks them why they did it. He directly accuses them. For what reason did you kidnap my wife, who also happens to be your daughter? A warning notice is displayed for the reader. In a brief flashback, the Viscountess is seen speaking with an attendant named Gilbert. The Viscount then enters, holding a letter and proposing a good idea to them. Back in the present, Benjamin confronts the couple, stating he summoned them together because a husband and wife are of one mind. Benjamin scoffs at their feigned ignorance, explaining that the crudely made ransom note proves their guilt, as they feared their handwriting would be recognized. Meanwhile, Roselia Van Treen reports that the estate is surrounded, concluding Grace's disappearance was an inside job. The Viscount finally confesses, admitting he orchestrated it due to a crippling debt of 10 million zen. Benjamin listens intently, his expression unreadable. The Viscount desperately explains that some of his people were taken hostage, leaving him with no choice. When the Viscount claims he alone knew the plan, Benjamin realizes everyone was involved and wonders how to break this news to his lady, as a memory of a smiling Grace fills his thoughts. He resolves that Grace must be told everything about her family's betrayal once she is rescued. Benjamin reflects on how he tried to think well of her family because she always spoke of them so fondly. He clutches the documents, questioning whether a family that would stage their own child's kidnapping can be considered good. With a cold stare, Benjamin offers the Viscount the documents he just praised. The Viscount hastily declines as Benjamin turns to leave. As the Viscount calls out to him, Benjamin pauses, asking if he has something to say. The Viscount shrinks back, managing only to say he has nothing more to add. Benjamin walks away, leaving the disgraced Viscount behind. A dark, transitional scene appears as Grace lets out a faint, "Ugh!" Lying bound and helpless, Grace begins to despair, believing Benjamin may have given up on her because she isn't worth saving. Alone and despairing, Grace's thoughts drift to Benjamin as she misses his warmth. A door bursts open as Benjamin rushes in, calling out frantically for his lady. Stunned and tearful, Grace looks up, realizing with disbelief that Benjamin has come for her. Benjamin quickly begins untying her restraints, gently asking if she's all right, and promising to explain everything. Overcome with emotion, Grace throws her arms around Benjamin in a desperate hug. She sobs into his shoulder, thanking him profusely for rescuing her. Clinging to him, Grace admits she was terrified. Benjamin reassures her it's natural, apologizes for being late, and says it's time to go home. As they walk away together, Grace asks if he has managed to capture the culprit. Benjamin confirms they have found the culprits and offers to let Grace decide their fate, volunteering to handle it if she cannot. After a moment of silence, Grace looks away and asks the devastating question. "My own family did this, right?" With a pained expression, Benjamin confirms her suspicion is correct, leaving Grace to stare out at the town in stunned silence. Tears stream down her face as she tries to speak to him. Overwhelmed by betrayal, Grace collapses among flowers, crying that she doesn't want to return to the manor. Benjamin looks down at her with a gentle, understanding smile, agreeing to her wish. An overhead view shows a grand carriage and its entourage departing from the town. Inside the carriage, Grace asks where they are headed, noting the scenery feels strangely familiar as they approach a lakeside estate. She gazes out the window, remarking on the beauty of the estate, whose colors remind her of autumn. Benjamin is glad she likes it, as she questions why the Felton Duchy owns property here and guesses it was for post-marriage visits. A single tear falls as Grace realizes the estate seems too well prepared, making her wonder if she missed a detail from the original story. As rain begins to fall, she can't shake the feeling that something is suspicious. Crackle. The scene transitions to the two of them sitting inside by a warm, comforting fireplace. Benjamin tells Grace that he has carried out her wish and punished her family. Grace silently recalls a distant memory of her father reading fairy tales to her and her sister by a similar fireplace. A flashback shows her father reading to them as she admits she hated those stories because other children used them to tease her. She touches a lock of her hair, pointing out to Benjamin that its color matches neither of her parents. She recounts being tormented by children who called her a demon's changeling, a flashback showing her being violently pushed down. She remembers how a young Gilbert would publicly ignore her suffering. However, she reveals that he secretly beat her tormentors afterward, and that her distant room was meant to protect her from stressful visitors. Looking at a family portrait, Grace concludes that while they were far from perfect, there were moments of kindness. In the present, she clutches her blanket, her body trembling with grief. Tearfully, she says that despite their flaws, she always believed they loved her, now questioning if that love was only worth 10 million zen. She realizes with crushing finality that she was never truly loved, and even the clumsy affection she received was a forgery. Benjamin gently calls out to her, breaking her painful reverie. With a concerned expression, he softly asks if he can hold her for a moment. Grace looks away, blushing and flustered by his gentle request. He carefully pulls her into his lap, holding her close. Finding comfort in his arms, Grace breaks down completely, sobbing uncontrollably. She confesses she has no fond memories of her homeland, as she was always seen as strange, foolish, and incomprehensible. The constant judgment she faced as the incompetent Grace became seeds of self-doubt that took root in her heart. Her tears continue to fall as she reflects that despite all of that pain, she still holds a deep love for her homeland, cradling a vision of the Viscounty as she questions her own heart. She cries out in frustration, torn between her desire not to forgive her family and her inability to completely hate them. Turning away from Benjamin, she laments that her feelings aren't kindness, but simply cowardice. Facing him with newfound resolve, Grace asks if he would repay the Viscounty's debt on her behalf. She looks away, determined, promising that she will repay him for it all someday. Benjamin's expression hardens as he firmly tells her that is not acceptable. He takes her hand gently, insisting that she must never belittle herself, regardless of what others say. Completely bewildered by his response, Grace can only stare at him, blushing and confused. She quickly clarifies her request for the Felton Duchy to purchase the debt and allow her father to repay it gradually over time. Benjamin agrees that her revised plan is possible, but adds one firm condition. Her family must be forbidden from ever using the capital estate prepared for them. Benjamin gently kisses Grace's hand. Grace gasps, blushing profusely at his tender gesture. A narrator explains that the Felton Duchy had prepared a capital estate for the Linden family, covering its maintenance costs. As her parents look on in despair, the text concludes that simply denying them use of the estate would be a sufficient punishment, effectively exiling them from the capital. With the debt settled, it is made clear the Felton Duchy will no longer provide any support to her family. Benjamin adds that the debt likely stems from Baron Lemonetti, a name Grace confirms she's heard before. Grace explains that her sister mentioned him, and while something felt off at the time, she hesitated to bring it up. She apologizes, but Benjamin smiles gently, telling her that her being unharmed is all that matters. Pat. As they embrace by a rain-streaked window, he reaffirms that her safety is truly enough for him. The rain stops, giving way to a bright, clear sky. The scene transitions to the grand Felton Duchy estate. Finally back in the duchy, Grace lies in bed, exhausted but unable to stop her thoughts from drifting back to her family's betrayal. She remains lost in thought, the weight of the events pressing down on her. Russell. Grace sits up with determination, deciding to have someone check if Tom Birkin has arrived and to search the manor for anything suspicious. She steels her resolve, acknowledging the pain but knowing she must keep moving forward if she wants to live. Opening a jewelry box, Grace removes a familiar caged pendant. She stares at the pendant in surprise. A warm, golden light emanates from it, described as having a divine radiance. The intricate pendant is shown in detail, revealing a glowing gem within a silver cage. As she examines it, she notes that it feels oddly familiar. Holding the pendant, Grace wonders if it's imbued with the Saintess's power, as it begins to tremble and glow. Suddenly she asks, "What is this?" as a dark, corrupting energy begins to spread across the floor of her room. The pendant's light flares brightly in response to the encroaching darkness. Flash! The divine light explodes outwards from the pendant. Crack. The gem within the pendant shatters. Stunned, Grace wonders what just happened, sensing that a barrier has been broken. She observes that while the light is gone, the pendant's frame is still intact. Her eyes widen in shock as she notices a new phenomenon and wonders what it is. A dark fog, just like the one from the Black Stone, is seeping out from the furniture around her. Grace calls for a maid named Sally, who cheerfully replies, "Yes, of course." Grace asks who bought the furniture for the guest house. Sally explains that the master, Benjamin, manages everything the lady uses, which makes Grace ponder. Realizing the fog is only targeting her, Grace reasons that Benjamin wouldn't try to kill her, but considers the possibility just in case. She asks about the white stones outside, and Sally confirms Benjamin prepared those as well. Noticing no fog near them, Grace concludes he isn't responsible. She recalls destroying the Black Stone before, and realizes she might be able to get rid of the fog, deciding it's worth trying. Grace tells Sally she is tired and will rest, asking her to collect any deliveries in her name, to which Sally agrees. Clack. The door to her room closes securely. A voice of doubt whispers in her mind, urging her to give up, and questioning how someone so indecisive could possibly succeed. Grace reaffirms her identity and accomplishments as Grace Kelt, confidently declaring she can do this as her pendant begins to glow once more. Shimmer. The pendant floats, bathed in a cool turquoise light. Flash. A brilliant wave of power radiates from Grace as she channels her energy. In a flash of light, she realizes forgotten memories and previously unknown information are flowing back into her mind. A memory surfaces of Benjamin asking if she will be disappointed, then promising to try his best. In the memory, a blushing Benjamin thinks that more than the ring, he wants the ladies. Thud. The influx of memories overwhelms Grace, causing her to collapse to the floor. She recognizes the flood of information as the memory of a forgotten year, and questions the nature of the divine power's light, noting it wasn't the usual golden color. A single tear traces a path down her cheek as the revelation hits her. She realizes the light was the color of her own eyes. The color is identified with a brilliant flash, green. Her hand trembles as she realizes she can't use the power consecutively. Since Benjamin handled the cursed items, she deduces the fog must be an inside job, possibly from leaked information. Knock, knock, knock. Sally's voice sounds from outside the door, asking if she may come in. Sally arrives at Grace's door, announcing she has brought all the requested items. Grace admires the lovely fabric, asking where it's being sent. Sally explains it's for the Countess of Yongsar's baby shower. Sally presents another box, explaining it's a gift for Grace from a special guest. Realizing the gift is from Holm Birkin, Grace accepts it with a quiet thank you. Inside, she finds adorable gloves and decides she should send a reply, suggesting they go to the study. Sally offers to escort her to the study. Grace pauses, looking toward the large wooden doors with a thoughtful expression. The scene transitions, showing a sun-drenched, empty room. Now inside the study, Grace notes that it's empty and that no one will disturb her for a while. As she begins to untie the ribbon around the glove box, a small note slips out from within. She unfolds the note, which contains a brief but significant message. Medicine from the Duke's Arte's apothecary. Holding the note, Grace confirms her suspicions about a connection and realizes she must rely on Tom Birkin's investigation, since this person isn't in the original story. Turning her attention to the next task, she picks up the bolt of blue fabric. She thinks that making a good impression is key, even though she doesn't know the Countess's tastes or size. With a cute, determined expression, she excitedly wonders what to include in the accompanying letter. After finishing her work, she stretches and is surprised to see the sky has already grown dark. Her eyes widen as she looks out the window and spots a familiar figure in the garden below. Benjamin. Benjamin looks up towards her window, his expression flustered. Startled by the eye contact, Grace presses her hand against the glass. He stands alone in the vast, beautifully lit garden. Grace sweats, looking flustered by the unexpected encounter. In a panic, she calls out for him to wait, promising she'll be right down. She quickly grabs a dark shawl from a nearby chair, draping it over her shoulders. She rushes out of the room. As she hurries, she feels an overwhelming sense of safety, musing that only Benjamin could possibly harm her. Reaching the garden, she catches her breath, her heart pounding. She stumbles towards Benjamin, breathlessly asking for wine and apologizing. He gently tells her she doesn't need to. He stands calmly before her as she notices the incredibly red sunset behind him. She wonders if the vivid sunset is the reason both of their faces appear so flushed. Benjamin takes her hand, noting the honor of escorting her and commenting on the ring she wears. Grace smiles, remembering that she bought the ring at a festival in the capital. Benjamin looks down at her hand, a tense and slightly pained expression on his face. He gently takes the ring from her finger. He carefully slides the ring back onto her finger, adjusting it perfectly. When she asks why, he explains it's a reaction to memories he doesn't fully have yet and suggests changing the subject, prompting Grace to ask for a favor. Benjamin agrees without hesitation, telling her to ask him anything. Grace explains that she knows the Imperial Palace will host a celebratory banquet now that the Western contamination has been purified. He confirms her suspicion, stating that while nothing is official, a banquet will surely be held soon. Clasping her hands, Grace gathers her resolve. She looks up at the sky and firmly declares her wish to attend the party, asking if it's okay. Benjamin seems taken aback, questioning her sudden desire to attend. Grace meets his gaze with unwavering determination. The scene transitions to later that night as Grace walks through the estate. She reflects that Benjamin must be surprised because her attendance rate at social gatherings has always been practically zero. She continues on, acknowledging that this party is a pivotal event in the original story and she must intervene to twist the plot. Before that, however, she reads a reply she has received. I humbly await. Smiling with relief, she reads the invitation and feels she has successfully overcome a major hurdle. Sally notes that she seems to have received a good answer, and Grace confirms it with a smile. Her expression turns serious as she asks Sally if the items she purchased from the Linden territory have all arrived. Sally confirms that the Scandella berries and additional mineral water are all accounted for and currently in the kitchen. Grace decides that a special drink would be the best gift for the baby shower and heads to the kitchen. With a confident, knowing smile, she finalizes her plan. She visualizes combining two ingredients, creating a sparkling red beverage in a wine glass. In the kitchen, Grace kneels before two large crates filled with bottles as Sally watches over her. Rattle. She picks up a bottle from the crate, ready to begin her work. Grace examines a bottle, relieved she was able to acquire both Chisandra berries and sparkling water, feeling the expense was justified. She asks Sally if the gift will be okay, but Sally expresses concern that it will seem cheap and insincere compared to what other nobles prepare. Grace simply smiles, dismissing Sally's worries. Confident the hostess will love it, Grace insists its value is beyond money and asks Sally to move the boxes to the carriage. Sally eagerly agrees. The scene transitions, showing a carriage wheel beginning to turn. They arrive at a grand, stunningly ornate mansion where the baby shower is being held. Dressed for the occasion, Grace is taken aback by the fancy venue, now understanding Sally's concern that her gift might seem insincere. Despite her apprehension, she strengthens her resolve, knowing she must attend this event. An attendant announces the arrival of Duchess Grace Felton as she presents her invitation. A pregnant woman with brown hair warmly welcomes Duchess Felton. The hostess expresses her joy at finally meeting Grace and officially welcomes her to the baby shower. Grace clasps her hands together nervously. She humbly apologizes for any perceived rudeness in her attendance and asks for their consideration. A narrator notes that due to Grace's high rank, using such honorifics might be seen as inappropriate. Grace spots a stern-looking woman identified as Mrs. Charles Marquis, confirming her target is present. The hostess smiles and kindly tells Grace to speak comfortably with her. With Sally beside her, Grace announces she has prepared a small gift. She graciously explains that she worried any gift would seem disrespectful given the Marquis family's prestige. The hostess thanks her warmly and informs her they are just about to start opening the presents. Grace steps back, hoping her gift will be well received and planning to build rapport later. The hostess begins the ceremony, announcing the first gift is from a Mr. Jeju. She gasps in shock, revealing that the first gift is the ownership deed to a villa. As the other guests applaud and exclaim in awe, a stunned Grace wonders what kind of gifts they've given. Her mind reels as she panics, wondering if all nobles give such extravagant gifts, and if hers is now inadequate. The next gifts are announced: a state-of-the-art carriage from Mrs. Charles Marquis and a golden rattle for the baby. The narration observes a pattern of repetitive and overlapping gifts among the guests. After an awkward period of similar presents, it is finally Grace's turn. The hostess smiles, announcing she will now open the final gift as she holds the box from Grace. As she looks inside, her smile fades into an expression of pure surprise. She pulls out a bottle of wine, looking utterly confused as Grace watches with bated breath. Grace quickly explains that it's non-alcoholic, prompting the hostess to wonder if it's simply juice. An attendant takes the bottle, preparing to serve it. He pours the sparkling red liquid into the hostess's glass. The hostess stares at the drink, recognizing it as that water. Her hands tremble slightly as she brings the glass closer, staring at its contents. Grace explains she created a non-alcoholic version of the rare drink so the expectant mother could enjoy it, and anxiously asks how it tastes. Gulp. The hostess takes a tentative sip. A hush falls over the crowd, as the other ladies whisper and watch the hostess's reaction. Her eyes light up with delight as she declares that the drink is delicious. Relieved, Grace explains she brought enough for everyone to taste as a token of apology for her sudden appearance. The other ladies murmur with excitement as they receive their own bottles of the special drink. Grace approaches the hostess, now addressing her as Lady Sub Marquis, and asks for a private moment, to which she agrees. She presents a second, more personal gift, stating that it felt meaningless to give everyone the exact same thing. Opening a small box, she reveals a beautiful pink coral hairpiece, explaining the color has many meanings. Grace concludes by saying she prepared it with the hope that Lady Sub Marquis will have a healthy child who resembles both parents. Lady Sub Marquis holds the gift box, deeply moved by Grace's thoughtful present and words. She beams with genuine happiness, her expression filled with gratitude. Clap, clap! Grace flinches slightly as applause suddenly breaks out. The other ladies applaud warmly, their previous skepticism replaced with admiration for Grace. Grace laughs with relief, thinking she successfully made a good impression and can now enjoy the party. One of the ladies expresses her happiness at finally meeting the Duchess and hopes to see her more in the future. Grace replies that their encouragement inspires her to attend more events, and she hopes to see them again. The narration explains this is Grace's way of declaring her intent to be more social, prompting another lady to mention the upcoming party at the royal palace. She turns the conversation to Lady Sub Marquis, asking about her plans for the event. Grace listens quietly, wondering what they are discussing. The narration notes that Lady Sub Marquis has a much smaller and thinner build than Grace, even while pregnant. A lady asks Lady Sub Marquis if she knows about a good weight loss medicine, catching Grace's attention. The other women whisper excitedly amongst themselves about that place. Feeling left out, Grace timidly asks where that place is. A blonde lady kindly explains that as a Duchess, Grace wouldn't be aware of it. A beautiful white lily is shown alongside a small, elegant container. She introduces the never-fading flower, a cream said to make skin as white as a saint's, a detail Grace notes was not in the original story. Other guests give mixed reviews, with one seeing a small effect, while another claims it didn't suit her at all. Lady Sub Marquis turns to Grace, offering to give her some products that are good for her skin. While complimenting Grace's natural attractiveness, she suggests trying one of the Merchant Guild's top-selling products. Flustered but intrigued, Grace shyly asks if she can have some. Accepting the small box, Grace thinks she might discover something and considers having Tom Birkin investigate. Grace realizes these women are essential for the story's future, recalling a scene where they praise Arya. Without friends for Arya, key events with Benjamin will not happen. Looking on with determination, Grace remembers that Benjamin currently has no romantic feelings for Arya. She concludes it's best to help Maria make friends to build familiarity and plans to arrange it at the next party. The scene transitions to a rack of elegant dresses gleaming in the sunlight. A woman presents Grace with the latest fashion catalog for the Imperial Princess's party, explaining that floral and cool patterns are currently popular. The woman highly recommends a fancy dress and accessory set as the most appropriate choice. While looking through the catalog, Grace admits the design is certainly beautiful. However, she decides against buying it, determined to avoid the same fashion trend as Arya, the central figure of an important event in the original story. A vision appears of a woman with white hair, Maria, being praised as background characters compare her to others. Grace tries to recall who Maria was compared to, figuring it must have been a symbolic figure like Arya. She closes the book, deciding to purchase clothes that are explicitly not trendy or popular. The day of the party arrives, showing the magnificent imperial palace under a clear sky. Standing at the entrance, Grace feels a wave of anxiety and wonders if it's too late to escape. She feels lonely seeing everyone else with an escort, wishing someone were by her side since Benjamin is busy and she's in a vulnerable divorce period. Suddenly, a man takes her arm from behind, commenting that she looks very tense. Stunned, Grace recognizes the Crown Prince, Sylvester, and panics, wondering why he is there and if Maria is nearby. He offers to be her escort, leaving Grace completely shocked and confused. In a comical chibi-style panel, Grace stammers an apology for her surprised reaction, still questioning his motive. Sylvester explains that Duke Felton asked him to, and secondly, that he personally cares about someone who has helped him. Grace immediately assumes he means the Saint and asks if it's okay for him not to enter with her. He clarifies that the Saint will be late, and escorting Grace is better to prevent rumors from spreading. Sylvester gently takes her gloved hand in his. He apologizes for his earlier bluntness. As they proceed into the bustling party hall, Grace walks down a wide, grand hallway, searching for familiar faces and noticing a particularly fancy door. She tentatively enters the room, apologizing to the occupants for making them come to meet her. Two ladies greet her cheerfully, explaining they were admiring the new mirror room and a Pyongyang family portrait. When asked if she remembers the portrait painting, which took over a year, Grace laughs and says it's been too long to recall. A portrait of the former Duke and Duchess of Helton is shown, noted as one of the few noble families allowed a portrait next to the royal families. Grace gazes at the portrait, a thought bubble hinting at a tragic incident that occurred last year. Two women gossip nearby, one quickly shushing the other as they notice the current Duchess, Grace, is present. Grace reflects on their words, confirming her in-laws passed away in an unexpected accident last year. She clutches her chest, feeling a pang of sorrow not for herself, but for Benjamin's loss. Her thoughts are interrupted when another guest points out a beautiful portrait of the current Duke and Duchess, startling Grace. Unwilling to see it, she walks away, thinking neither she nor Benjamin would look happy in such a painting. Deciding she's already tired and regretting her visit, her departure is halted by the announcement of Saint Arya's arrival. Grace turns with a look of surprise. She wonders why Arya is already there, having expected her to arrive later with Benjamin. Her eyes widen in shock at an unexpected sight. She sees the white-haired Arya entering with a brown-haired man, whom she mistakes for Benjamin, and questions why they are together. Stunned, Grace again questions why Arya and Benjamin are arriving together. She realizes with growing unease that this deviates from the original story where Arya appears alone, sensing that something is different. The silver-haired Arya looks down with a knowing smile as a distressed Grace looks up at her. Grace realizes with a jolt that Arya is wearing a dress similar to her own and the legendary Sun's Blessing necklace. A flashback reveals that Tom Birkin was informed the Saintess planned to show off the necklace after purifying the Western contamination. Grace laments her mistake, realizing that by wearing a similar dress, she has unintentionally fulfilled a part of the original story she tried to avoid. Overwhelmed by the whispers of the crowd, she realizes she is the person who appeared in a dress similar to Arya's. From across the room, Benjamin's gaze finds her. His expression softens into a warm, blushing smile as he calls out to his wife. Benjamin approaches, and Grace looks up at him as music notes fill the air between them. Their moment is interrupted by the grand entrance of the Emperor. Benjamin places a hand over his heart as he and Grace bow their heads in respect. The Emperor looks down from his dais, formally addressing Duke Felton. Benjamin respectfully confirms his identity, noting that his wife has joined him for the banquet. He unveils a stunning ornate goblet, explaining it is a gift from his wife to the Emperor, which dazzles the onlookers. With a proud smile, Benjamin formally presents the beautiful goblet to His Majesty. Later, Benjamin returns to Grace's side, apologizing for being late, and she playfully accepts his apology. She asks about his conversation with the Emperor, and he explains it was about the jewel-boosting trade. adding that they received 2 gifts in return. Intrigued, Grace questions what kind of gifts they received. Benjamin reveals with a smile that the Emperor has granted them 2 requests within his authority. Grace assures him it's fine that he didn't consult her and asks what he requested. He says the first was about the portrait in the Hall of Mirrors. He explains that he disliked the old portrait and received the Emperor's permission to have a new one painted to replace it. As he places a comforting hand on her shoulder, Grace asks about his second request. Blushing slightly, Benjamin admits he asked for the right to name the jewel himself. Grace beams, eagerly asking what its new name is. He prepares to make his grand announcement to her. Benjamin reveals he has named the jewel Grace, leaving her blushing and utterly flustered by the romantic gesture. He looks on with a smug, satisfied smile at her embarrassed reaction. Changing the subject, Grace asks about the Crown Prince and the Saintess, and Benjamin says he sent the busy couple ahead. Grace reflects that their romance is proceeding well, which will hopefully prevent Benjamin's dark turn before a sudden realization hits her. Remembering a pivotal event from the story, she turns to a man and calls out to get his attention. The man asks if she wants to go outside with him, much to her surprise. The scene shifts to a large, sunlit conservatory filled with plants. A flashback explains a dangerous incident from the novel. A knight named Sylvester is injured during a date, shocking Arya and disabling her powers. Grace knows she must prevent this, but hesitates to simply call for knights, as she can't recall the cause of the attack, and fears a spy is among them. Pivoting, Grace asks Benjamin why he was late, and he explains he first went to the temple and arrived with the Saintess. The mention of the temple startles Grace, who looks at him in shock. Benjamin calmly confirms he was at the temple, where he discussed everything that had happened to his wife. Man explains that he went to the temple to have the knight and priest who were rude to his wife demoted and moved to the far south. With a smug smile, Benjamin adds that when the temple asked to see his wife, he told them to come to the mansion themselves if they were so concerned. He coldly states that the one who needs something is the one who moves, questioning how they dared to order his wife around, leaving Grace stunned. As his words sink in, a dark memory overwhelms Grace, swallowing her in a black fog. In a disturbing vision, she sees her past self lying helpless as a dark energy corrupts her hands. The memory continues with the unsettling image of 2 mysterious, hooded figures murmuring in the darkness. As the black fog intensifies in her memory, the past Grace's face becomes eerily peaceful, as if accepting her fate. Snapping back to the present, Grace stumbles, and a concerned Benjamin steadies her, asking if she is all right. Reeling, Grace is struck by another vision of a past trauma, before a distant scream pierces her thoughts, which she recognizes as the Saintess's voice. A promotional page for the series translation team is displayed. Realizing Arya is in danger, Grace resolves that they must go to her immediately. A terrifying memory floods her mind of her original death, where she failed to stop a sect and died, crying out that she didn't want to die. Overwhelmed by the horrifying vision, Grace reaches out a trembling hand as she stands beside Benjamin. Benjamin notes that Grace does not look all right, prompting her to stammer his title in surprise. Trying to deflect, Grace insists the Saintess is the Empire's treasure and more important than her, to which Benjamin agrees. Leaning closer, Benjamin intensely asks her what that makes her. Grace looks up, completely taken aback by the directness of his question. He looks her in the eyes and asks, "Aren't you my only family?" Realizing what he just said, Benjamin is visibly shocked by his own heartfelt confession. Grace stares back at him, equally stunned into silence by his unexpected words. Pushing past the moment, Grace urgently explains that the Saintess is alone and unable to call for help. Benjamin surveys the area and agrees, noting the lack of knights nearby. Without warning, Benjamin sweeps Grace into his arms, announcing they'll go together, and leaving her utterly flustered. As he carries her, Benjamin reassures a speechless Grace that she isn't heavy. They arrive at a garden to find a broken statue and a crying woman hunched over in distress. The scene is revealed. Arya cradles an injured and unconscious Sylvester, as Benjamin, Grace, and another lady arrive and ask what happened. Arya looks up at them, her face streaked with tears of desperation and fear. Crying, Arya explains that a statue suddenly exploded while she was talking with Sylvester, and he was injured protecting her. Grace watches with a worried expression, realizing this dangerous event is unfolding. Looking at the tragic scene, Grace recalls that this incident was a major trial for the protagonist in the original story. A vision of Arya crying reminds Grace that this event is a crucial test for the story's heroine. The narration explains the core problem. Arya's divine healing power isn't working. The source of her power is explained. It grows stronger the happier she is. Because of her recent unhappiness, Arya is unable to summon the power needed to save Sylvester. Sylvester lies gravely wounded, clutching the bleeding gash in his side. Arya mentally berates herself, realizing her recent negative thoughts about the Crown Prince are blocking her happy memories and thus her powers. Watching Arya struggle, Grace thinks with empathy that she understands exactly what's happening. Grace recalls the story of how Arya and Sylvester's relationship began while trying to undo his curse. A memory flashes of Arya and Sylvester sharing a happy, romantic moment by the water. Grace remembers that while Sylvester and Arya developed feelings for each other, Arya's current anxiety is making her recall only the worst things. A gentle voice speaks, reassuringly saying, "It's all right." Grace gently pats Arya's shoulder in a gesture of comfort. She encourages Arya, telling her that after every storm, the sky is always there. Grace humbly advises Arya to try healing him one more time, promising that Benjamin will help if she fails. Touched by the offer of help, Arya smiles through her tears, saying they're the first people to ever support her like this. With a small, sheepish smile, Arya comically clarifies, excluding Sylvester, to which Grace happily agrees. With renewed hope, Arya places her hands over Sylvester's wound to try and heal him again. Grace feels a sense of happiness wash over her as she wonders if she was able to help. She comes to a powerful realization, affirming to herself that she is someone who can be helpful to others. With a genuine, warm smile, Grace acknowledges her own happiness in this newfound purpose. In a moment of clarity, Grace thinks she might finally understand what happiness feels like. A brilliant light erupts from Arya's hands as she successfully heals Sylvester, leaving Grace and another lady speechless. A promotional page for the series translation team is displayed. Arya, her face filled with awe, turns to Grace and asks if she can see the glowing power. A brilliant flash of divine energy radiates from Arya's hands as Sylvester's wound closes. Grace watches in shock, realizing that divine power having a color is a detail that was never mentioned in the novel. Arya asks Benjamin to take Sylvester to the palace, promising to follow after checking his condition, but he hesitates, concerned for Grace. Benjamin agrees to the plan, suggesting he'll simply tell everyone he got lost, and Arya guided him. As Benjamin carries Sylvester away, he tells Grace to follow quickly and directly, leaving her and Arya alone in the garden. Arya explains that not all divine powers manifest as light. They often take on the color of one's soul as a golden magic circle glows in her palm. Grace listens intently as Arya continues, implying a deeper meaning behind her words. Arya reveals her stunning conclusion. The similar aura Grace felt means they share the same divine power. Arya gently holds Grace's face, her expression earnest as she tries to convince her of the truth. Stunned and flustered, Grace refutes the idea, insisting that it can't be possible. Arya reminds Grace of the pendulum she'd given her, explaining it's made from a holy statue and can amplify divine power. A flashback shows the ornate pendulum, its crystal glowing brightly against a backdrop of stained glass. Arya explains the pendulum is a charm used against heavy contamination, prompting Grace to realize it was given because their conditions were similar. Arya looks slightly taken aback as Grace connects the dots. A woman with pink hair, wearing a formal military uniform, appears with a serious expression. She reports that a lighting magic tool malfunctioned, injuring the prince, and announces they will report it while urging Grace and Arya inside. Grace questions the official story, wondering aloud if it was really just a magic tool. She looks down in thought, troubled by the implications of the official report. As she walks, Grace realizes this event explains the attempted assassination plot from the original story and worries about the consequences. A door creaks open, leading into a grand hall. Grace and Arya walk arm in arm through the palace, sharing a smile. In the darkness, unseen eyes watch them as whispers begin to spread. The ominous whispers follow them through the hall as distorted, shadowy figures judge them from afar. Resigned, Grace sighs, thinking she can't help but be compared unfavorably to the beautiful Arya, and resolves to find Benjamin. Grace introduces Arya to some ladies, hoping they'll become friends, and Arya responds with pure excitement. The scene transitions to a lavish and elegantly decorated room inside the palace. Two noble women warmly welcome Arya to their circle. The women eagerly invite Arya to join them, and extend the invitation to Grace as well. Grace politely declines, making an excuse that she was separated from Benjamin and needs to find him. She gives a convincing, apologetic smile, saying her husband must be worried. As Grace leaves, the women admire her seemingly wonderful relationship with her husband, expressing their own desire for such a marriage. Grace approaches the uniformed woman, addressing her as Lord Bantron, and learns that Benjamin is in the Crown Prince's room. Grace nods in understanding and walks away, leaving Lord Bantron to watch her go. She makes her way through the opulent palace, heading toward the prince's quarters. Arriving at an ornate door, Grace finds the hallway strangely empty. questioning the lack of guards. Peeking into the Hall of Mirrors, she spots a figure inside and cautiously wonders who it is. A dark-haired man holding a rose greets her, mentioning a gift he sent and his first attempt at creating something real. Completely baffled, Grace asks the unfamiliar man to identify himself. He introduces himself as Jade Bayman of the Jarte Duchy, explaining his absence from society is due to a dislike of official functions. Grace is shocked, realizing he is Duke Jarte, a character of some importance from the original story. Despite his seemingly pleasant demeanor, Grace feels a deep sense of unease about him. Feeling uncomfortable, Grace decides she needs to leave and find Benjamin immediately. As she turns to go, Jade Bayman watches her, politely bidding her to be careful. Grace stands before a pair of massive, ornate golden doors, ready to enter. With determination, she walks towards the grand doors to find her husband. As Grace pushes open the doors to the Crown Prince's room, Benjamin greets her formally. Benjamin stands with a glass of wine, his expression unreadable, as Grace mentally questions his sudden formality. Benjamin asks about the Crown Prince's condition, noting that while his wound healed, his breathing seems faint. Grace explains the physician found no major issues and expresses her relief that the banquet's reputation was saved. Taking her hand, Benjamin suggests they return to the banquet hall together. As he leads her away, Grace looks at him with a mix of confusion and concern. Noticing the tense atmosphere, Grace is suddenly shocked to see a red stain on a nearby noblewoman's white dress. The woman with long white hair stares down at the spill, as an unseen person recalls witnessing the event. A lady with pink hair points an accusing finger, claiming a knight from the Belton Duchy was carrying that exact drink. The woman with white hair tries to intervene, insisting it's a misunderstanding and not the Duchess's fault. Grace realizes this is a twisted version of the original story's plot, now directed at her, as an enraged Benjamin shatters his glass. Clearing her throat, Grace composes herself, thinking that the true culprit likely escaped unseen. The woman with white hair feels frustrated that her words are being ignored, and resolves to handle the situation herself. Benjamin icily questions the accusation, asking if they believe a knight under his command would do such a thing. The pink-haired lady argues that Grace had a motive, as people were mocking her for wearing a similar dress to the saint. Grace stands beside a grim-faced Benjamin, ready to face the false accusation together. She feels reassured by his presence, knowing he is a kind person who contains his anger and that he has her back. With a tight clench of her fist, Grace prepares to defend herself against the baseless claims. Stepping forward, Grace refutes the accusation by pointing out that many people are wearing the popular dress design. As murmurs spread through the crowd, Grace reluctantly prepares to play a card she had hoped to keep hidden. Grace addresses the entire room, her voice ringing with authority. Clutching the pendulum from Arya, she desperately pleads for it to work. The crowd recoils from the accuser as she stands flustered and alone. Holding up a glass of red liquid, Grace calmly identifies it as the tea in question. The accuser agrees, claiming a servant said only the Duchess took that specific tea. Grace and Benjamin stand together, unimpressed by the flimsy accusation. Looking over a list, Grace explains she checked the lounge's records and asks for the person who drank blue mallow tea. Cornered, the accuser stammers that their tea was a different color, to which Grace reveals that blue mallow turns red with lemon. Defeated, the young lady collapses to the floor as Grace and Benjamin stand over her with the proof. Grace realizes this was a coordinated plot to harm the saint, concluding that she and Arya are being underestimated. Deferring to Benjamin's authority, Grace asks him to decide the matter, and he smiles, promising a quick resolution. Exhausted by the ordeal, Grace simply asks Benjamin if they can go home now. During the carriage ride, Benjamin watches over a sleeping Grace, noting how tired she must be. Grace awakens in an unfamiliar but luxurious room, wondering when they arrived. Benjamin explains they just got back and she woke up immediately, leaving her flustered. As Benjamin helps her from the carriage, he gently tells her it's time to go back. Pausing before their home, Grace suddenly recalls Priest Boris and asks when he is scheduled to arrive. Benjamin takes her hand with a charming smile, suggesting they can set the date themselves, and asking for her preference. Looking at the moonlit sky, Grace firmly requests his visit be as soon as possible. She then requests to stay in the main building until the priest's visit, planning to move to the annex afterward. A blushing Benjamin happily tells her she can stay in the main building for her entire life. He assures her that the Duchess's room is always kept ready for her, causing Grace to blush in return. Entering her new room, Grace is impressed by the pristine condition and lack of dust. She sinks her hand into the bed, pleasantly surprised by how cozy it feels. Grace quickly falls asleep, finding comfort in a place she's never been before. In a different room, an unseen person asks if a report they've received is true. A hand rests firmly upon the papers detailing the report. An attendant confirms the report's accuracy to Benjamin, who stands with his back to him. Benjamin clenches his fist in frustration, muttering that the situation has become troublesome. A report reveals Baron Lemonetti committed suicide after confessing to a crime, leaving behind a will that accuses the Crown Prince of treason. Benjamin inwardly worries that the entire Palmer family, including Grace's sister Gloria, will be harmed if Grace finds out the truth. Resolved, Benjamin orders Gloria Palmer's identity changed to Gloria Linden before the facts become public. The scene fades through a gritty, abstract transition, implying a restless passage of time. As a new day dawns, Grace awakens, noting her headache is gone and confirming a private suspicion. A fork spears a leaf of salad during a quiet meal. Grace eats opposite a man whose back is turned, the dining room filled with a silent tension. The man, a young noble, asks Grace if he can tell her something important. Surprised by his serious tone, Grace hesitantly agrees. He explains that after much deliberation, he feels she must hear some news about her older sister. Instantly concerned, Grace turns and urgently asks what happened to her sister. The man reveals that Baron Lemonetti's scheme drove the Linden family into debt, but they used the Duke's power to finalize Gloria's divorce, protecting Grace's family. Grace worries internally, knowing she owns the only appearance-changing magic tools, fearing her sister might discover the deception. Composing herself, Grace offers a faint smile as she absorbs the complicated news. The scene transitions, panning across the elegant room. Grace stands pensively by a large window, contemplating the recent revelations. A maid informs Grace that a letter has arrived for her, and she instructs the maid to leave it on the table. As Grace reads the letter, her expression grows stern and determined. Grace tells a maid named Sally that she needs to go out, requesting guards and attendants be prepared. Arriving at a modest building, Grace tells her maids to wait outside and call if anything happens. Inside, Grace warmly greets a man she calls Birkin. Birkin returns the greeting, formally thanking Grace for ensuring his safety. As they catch up, Birkin jokes that he often worried the temple would try to get rid of him. His tone becomes serious as he delivers bad news, asking Grace when she started taking a certain medicine. Grace recalls taking it about a year ago, but stopped before meeting him, sensing something was wrong. Birkin reveals the supplement was a dangerous cocktail of a disorienting sedative and a power amplifier. He explains that while the amplifier is useless for ordinary people, it was key to the Apothecaries Union's growth. With an image of a radiant Grace in the background, Birkin warns of the unknown effects on someone with divine power. When Grace questions the danger to an ordinary person, he reveals the third ingredient, an addictive sleep inducer. Shocked by the revelation, Grace wonders aloud why the temple would secretly give her such dangerous drugs. Birkin suggests the Apothecaries Union is in partnership with the temple, using its authority to bolster sales. Acknowledging his findings, Grace decides to table the drug investigation and moves to her next request. She asks him to investigate something called the Everlasting Flower. Birkin agrees and adds that he has already taken the liberty of doing something else for her. He holds her gaze, his expression one of firm loyalty. He presents her with a thick file, a report he compiled on people who have been slandering her. Grace is taken aback by the gesture, accepting the file with a hesitant thank you. Birkin firmly states that she does not deserve the slander being spread about her. Visibly touched by his dedication, Grace clutches the report. Later, in her carriage, Grace reads the report, discovering the anonymous rumors were started by daughters of noble families. She recognizes one of the culprits as someone from the England baronetcy, an old acquaintance. Recalling the banquet, she realizes the incident was orchestrated by the family, not just one resentful girl. Grace soberly concludes the confrontation at the banquet was a deliberate attack aimed at her. Her mind races, identifying the temple as the most likely suspect, but one piece doesn't fit. She questions the temple's motive for targeting her, frustrated by the lack of information. Holding the file, Grace asks an attendant when Priest Boris will arrive, and learns it's next week, much to her concern. Looking out over the estate, she resolves to use the priest to her advantage, regardless of his true intentions. A new day begins at the sunlit Belton estate. A maid greets Grace Felton, who appears thoughtful. A blushing Benjamin Felton wishes Grace a good morning, asking if she is on her usual walk. As they stroll together, Benjamin observes that Grace seems to be in high spirits, guessing something is going well for her. Grace awkwardly wonders what good news Benjamin received, guessing it's related to his thriving magic tool enterprise. He asks if she is heading out, and she confirms an engagement that includes a stop at the Magic Tools Union headquarters. Promising to be careful, Grace listens as Benjamin advises her to remember any discourtesy from temple officials and report it to him. Benjamin lets out a satisfied laugh. A flustered Grace wonders if his offer to intervene was just a joke. A priest arrives with his retinue, a nameplate identifying him as Boris Benedict. Grace welcomes Father Benedict, thanking him for coming on short notice and inviting him to rest from his journey. Her hand gestures toward a steaming cup on the table. Boris identifies the drink as coffee, gratefully acknowledging it as a rare luxury for those from the temple. Seated opposite him in the grand room, Grace humbly replies that he flatters her. Boris states that the temple leadership must offer an official apology, insisting the matter cannot be overlooked. Taking a sip from her cup, Grace silently notes that he seemed ready to let it pass before, as he mirrors her action. Her eyes remain fixed on him as she drinks. Boris observes that she appears much brighter than during their last meeting. Surprised, Grace listens as he explains his deep worry, citing intermittent reports on her poor condition at the temple. His face cast in shadow, Boris elaborates that his concern only grew as her health failed to improve. Grace asks if he truly reads the reports about her, hoping they don't cause him distress. Boris reveals Benjamin requested he watch over her well-being and regularly review those reports. He then asks if she's kept up with her journal, suggesting it eases melancholy, causing her expression to falter. Grace realizes the journal has surfaced, meaning the original Grace must have suspected something was wrong. She deduces there would be no other reason for her predecessor to keep a public diary. Her hand clenches as she connects the original Grace's actions to the influence of the drugs. Concluding this is the worst possible outcome, Grace realizes Benjamin must have thought the drugs were helpful, leaving her isolated and dependent on the temple. She understands he had neither the time nor the reason to question the temple's remedies. Taking a calming breath, Grace's expression becomes resolute. Remembering that Boris doesn't drink coffee, she brightly offers to introduce him to the Felton's unique way of enjoying it as Sally brings a container. Boris appears slightly hesitant about her offer. A scoop of white ice cream is placed into a small, ornate bowl. Grace explains the delightful method is to eat it with a spoon, savoring it like a fine custard. Calling it a novel approach, Boris tries the dessert, speculating she learned it during her recent social forays. He then brings up his lingering concern over rumors about a scoundrel who uttered strange words to her during the fire. Startled, Grace thinks she had almost forgotten the incident until he brought it up. A flashback shows her terrified expression during the orphanage fire. The memory shifts to the wounded man she encountered in the alley. She recalls his last words before collapsing were about a vendetta against the Duchess. Grace suspects the temple incited the matrons, realizing it only makes sense for him to mention it now if someone knew the cause and stood to gain. With a steely gaze, she concludes that he isn't the only one waiting for the opportune moment. A crack appears on Boris's cup as he lifts it. With a sharp shatter, the cup breaks, spilling hot coffee down his pristine robes as his attendants gasp in shock. As Sally cries out in alarm, Grace quickly asks if Father Benedict is hurt. Boris reassures her that he's fine, explaining the liquid isn't as hot as it appears. Grace immediately takes the blame for the accident and insists he must wash up at once. He dismisses the offer, claiming his garments can be cleansed by divine power, but she firmly refuses to impose on him for a trifle. Grace orders Sally to prepare a bath immediately, and the maid rushes to obey. Boris smiles ruefully, lamenting that he seems to be committing one faux pas after another. Looking down with feigned humility, Grace questions his meaning, insisting the misfortune was her own fault. A subtle, knowing smile touches her lips as she reflects on the situation. The scene shifts to a luxurious, prepared bathroom. It's revealed the shattered cup was no accident. Grace had intentionally chosen a goblet that was already cracked. She had selected an ornate cup that hid the hairline fissure, knowing the thermal shock from the hot coffee and cold ice cream would split it open. Boris excuses himself with a smug smile, offering to step away for a moment. Grace thinks to herself that she has been waiting for this exact invitation. As Sally leads Boris away, Grace watches them go. Grace stops a novice priest from Boris's retinue, asking to trouble him for a favor. Noting his build is similar to a temple knight's, she sweetly asks if she can impose on him. Grace asks the novice to fetch a set of garments from a tailor using the carriage waiting outside. Surprised, the novice stammers, repeating her mention of a carriage. Grace explains that House Felton will procure fine quality clothing for Boris, as they cannot return his Grace's clothes as they are. She assures the attendant not to worry about Boris's safety. The novice agrees to return quickly, asking another man to look after the priest in his absence. The scene transitions to the sunlit, luxurious bathroom. Now alone outside the bathroom, Grace pauses to review her plan one last time. Inside, Boris observes that even the bath is filled with arcane devices. Grace recalls learning how to draw strength in concert with a power called Aria. She remembers the instruction to think of something joyful. Recalling a man's smile, she reflects that despite life's harshness, true happiness existed in that moment. Surrounded by a magical aura and blooming lilies, Grace successfully manifests her power. A spark zaps her hand as she suddenly questions why she ever considered that smile to be one of happiness. As Boris startles in the bath, Sally arrives, prompting Grace to feign a Magitech malfunction and ask her to investigate. Holding a lantern, Sally agrees to check on the situation and enters the bathroom. Grace apologizes to Boris for the rare malfunction, but he insists the fault may lie with him. With Boris and Sally completely distracted, Grace sees her opportunity. She reaches for Boris's discarded clothes, targeting a pendulum resting on top. Praising herself, she successfully swaps his powerless pendulum with an identical one. She nervously checks the pouch containing the replacement, hoping she brought the correct one. A single tear of relief and stress rolls down her cheek. Looking at the item in her hand, she desperately wonders why this is happening. Boris exits the bathroom, stating he is in her debt, but Grace demurely apologizes for the constant mishaps. He laughs, dismissing it as no trouble, and suggesting they hurry as the hour is late. Grace agrees with a subtle, triumphant smile. Walking down the hall, she reassures herself that the moment has arrived, and everything is going exactly as planned. In her bedroom, Boris begins what he calls a consultation, which Grace doesn't remember, realizing this counseling is unusual as he asks her to lie down. Hesitantly, Grace asks Father Benedict to hold her hand for a moment. She feigns nervousness, explaining it's been a long time since her last examination by such an eminent priest. As Boris takes her hand, a thin, barely tangible thread of Grace's holy power extends towards him. The thread is so fine that Boris fails to sense it, as priests' sacred energies normally just reinforce one another. However, Boris's current condition is different. The coffee he drank was laced with a drug that Grace herself never ingested. Grace knows that while a powerful surge would destroy the drug, slowly feeding it priest-level power allows it to persist. Boris stands with his eyes closed, seemingly in a daze. Shocked, Grace wonders if the black mist and the drug are causing this reaction, questioning what has been happening to her all this time. Grace asks a dazed Boris if he is all right. Boris replies that he is fine, then pauses, questioning whether he truly is. Looking away, Grace simply tells him that he is all right. His eyes are now covered by a dark blindfold as he calmly states, "Then I'm all right," leaving Grace to wonder what is happening. Having fallen into a trance after ingesting the drug and channeling divine power, Boris's state makes Grace wonder if this is what happened to her during her counseling. The story's title card is displayed against a decorative background. Finding the situation more troubling than expected, Grace tells the hypnotized Boris he can just forget the question she's about to ask. After he agrees, Grace asks why he is counseling her, to which he replies, "For the world," stating her existence is not helpful to it. Grace asks what Boris will do after the counseling, and he responds that he will report that she needs to be purified. Boris specifies he must report to the statue on the right, leaving Grace confused until she pictures an angelic statue carved from holy stone. Announcing the counseling is over, Boris prepares to leave, and Grace notes with relief that he seems to remember nothing. Grace ponders his hypnotized words about her being a threat, wondering if the original Grace Felton was truly that kind of person. She recalls the original story where Benjamin destroyed the temple, and fears it was because his true beloved wasn't Arya. Her terrifying thought concludes with the possibility that the temple killing Grace was the catalyst. She considers the horrifying idea that it might be right for her to disappear if she is indeed a disaster for the world. Clenching her hand, she rejects the thought, declaring that she wants to live even more, even if it's selfish. Her eyes flash with renewed determination. Startled by a voice calling her name from off-screen, Grace quickly responds that she'll be right there. As she hurries away, she's struck by a sudden, intense desire to see Benjamin. She finds Benjamin standing by several wagons, and he greets her. Benjamin asks how her counseling went, and Grace explains she came out specifically to greet him. Flustered and blushing, Benjamin asks if she is speaking to him. He bashfully explains that the contents of the wagons are all gifts for her, leaving Grace stunned. Grace eagerly asks to see the gifts, and after Benjamin agrees, she pulls back a tarp with a gasp. The wagon is filled with large sacks, a decorative chest, and a vase of flowers. Benjamin explains the association sent extra furniture and landscape objects to make up for the previous incident. Realizing he means the pebbles, Grace recalls the black mist that burst from the last delivery. Noting Benjamin's ignorance of the mist, she simply asks if it's okay to replace the object, and he agrees. Benjamin adds that the association members were happy and are excited to visit her in person next time. Grace smiles, stating that she is also interested in the magical device association connected to him. Benjamin blushes deeply and looks away, touched by her words. A man from Benjamin's retinue observes them, thinking that his master is flirting again, and that Grace will never know the truth. Later that night in her room, Grace decides to read the first entry in the diary once more. She realizes the writing style feels less like a personal diary and more like a formal report for someone else. Turning the page, she finds a grid of check marks, which she recognizes as a record of her counseling sessions. Lying back, she stares at the ceiling and questions if the original Grace was actually murdered. The diary describes how the original Grace exhibited extreme anxiety, as if her depression were contagious to others. She remembers that in the original novel, the details of Grace's fate became flimsy toward the end. She wonders if the original Grace took her own life, questioning if depression induced by another constitutes murder. A dark mist seeps from the new furniture, leading Grace to suspect the temple and the association are collaborating. She reasons that if her power were truly divine, the temple wouldn't deem it a danger to the world, recalling that the saintess is treated as precious. Though scared, Grace resolves to act, knowing she's getting too close to the truth to stop now. Determined, she retrieves a heavy lantern from beneath her bed. She resolves to regain her memories from the year she has forgotten, believing there must be a clue within them. Holding the lantern, Grace stands with a resolute gaze, ready to uncover the truth. Closing her eyes, she focuses on finding a happy memory, trying to remember her past. A wave of magical energy swirls around her as she delves into her mind. A fleeting memory of Benjamin's blushing, averted gaze flashes in her mind. The memory becomes clearer, showing his flustered face from their earlier conversation, a moment etched into her mind. The story's title card is displayed against a decorative floral background. A memory surfaces of a younger Benjamin promising to give Grace a plant after she expressed jealousy over the ones her mother grew. In the memory, Benjamin expresses surprise that she likes plants so much. Young Grace shyly clarifies that it's more that she likes what he gives her. The memory of young Grace shows her looking up, suddenly startled by something unseen. Back in the present, Grace recalls that the original Grace was knowledgeable about plants, yet when she first awoke in this body, she had claimed to know nothing about them. A clear contradiction. A close-up of a sharp green eye, presumably Benjamin's, from a past memory. The final memory fragment shows a garden with handwritten notes attached to various flowers. Grace acknowledges Benjamin's past awareness, feeling a paradoxical ache of guilt and profound happiness. Holding the lantern, she gathers her resolve to confront the memory she's been seeking. A memory strikes, sending her hurrying through the opulent manor hallway. Her mind flashes back to a rose garden, where a younger, startled Grace calls out for her lord. A young Benjamin appears, asking what's wrong as she desperately explains she's looking for the flowers he gifted her. Blushing, the younger Grace clarifies that she meant a previous gift of flowers. The memory shifts to Benjamin sweetly promising to give her any flowers she wants. Visibly moved, Benjamin from the past realizes with a happy blush how much she cherished his gift. While the memory brings her joy, Grace feels foolish for treasuring a past that isn't hers. Overcome with guilt, she wonders why no one, not even Benjamin, has noticed she isn't the real Grace. She's lost in somber thought, wrestling with the weight of her stolen identity. Shaking her head, she dismisses the tempting thought of simply taking over Grace's life for good. She decides her first step must be to recover all of the original Grace's memories to find answers. Meanwhile, Benjamin is urged by his attendant to depart on an urgent matter. Grace intercepts Benjamin, who explains an urgent letter requires his attention, but promises to return soon. Smiling warmly, she asks if they can share dinner together when he gets back. Benjamin blushes deeply, touched by the offer, and happily agrees that it would be an honor. Later, in the library, Grace refocuses on her investigation by opening the mysterious diary again. She carefully flips through the book, determined to uncover more hidden clues within its pages. She concludes that the diary's official entries for the temple seem intentionally meaningless. Her attention is caught by a pressed flower as she reads over a list of plant names. A chill runs down her spine as she deciphers the flower's coded message: falseness, sorrow, and death. The diary reveals another ominous flower, the snowdrop, deepening the mystery. She realizes the original Grace knew the temple was killing her, chronicling her impending doom in the diary. Clutching the diary, she vows with grim determination not to suffer the same meaningless fate as her predecessor. Believing she can change the future, she resolves to investigate the circumstances of Grace's death to avoid it. She briefly acknowledges that her own feelings for Benjamin are beginning to grow stronger. A sudden realization gives her pause as she looks over her shoulder into the empty room. She theorizes that in the original novel, Benjamin must have discovered this diary and its dark secrets. An image of a wilted plant in a pot serves as a grim metaphor for Grace's fate. She recalls a key detail. The truth of her death was only discovered after she was gone. The realization of this truth is what likely sent Benjamin on his vengeful path against the temple. She closes the book, deciding she cannot tell Benjamin yet, fearing the conflict it would ignite. Puzzled, she questions why the Magic Tool Alliance, of all organizations, is supplying them with furniture. Peeking out the window, she sees only ordinary furniture, yet she can't shake the feeling of an ominous aura. Overwhelmed by the tangled conspiracy, she lets out a small, frustrated sigh. Evening descends upon the estate, casting long shadows and a contemplative mood. She sits down to a simple meal, finding comfort in the warm soup and bread. As she eats, she blushes, wondering if the special care put into the meal was for her sake. Benjamin confirms he asked the staff to prepare a special dinner, and she tells him it's delicious. Grace struggles to find the right moment to broach her suspicions, and Benjamin notices her hesitation. Flustered by his question, she waves her hands and quickly insists that nothing is wrong. The narrative pauses for a moment of quiet reflection. Sensing her continued unease, Benjamin gently asks again if something is troubling her. She becomes flustered once more, assuring him that everything is perfectly fine. Deftly changing the subject, Grace asks about the furniture from the Magecraft Union, feigning simple curiosity. She remarks that it's unusual for an organization focused on magic tools to be involved in furniture making. Benjamin looks concerned, misinterpreting her question as a complaint about the gifts he's provided. She clarifies that she's not unhappy, but simply wants to learn more about managing the household. Benjamin is stunned and overjoyed, blushing as he realizes she wants to take an active role in House Felton. Grace agrees to Benjamin's explanation, asking if her desire to learn is a problem. Benjamin realizes she's unaware of their separation period, and begins to explain that the Magecraft Union doesn't mass-produce furniture. Grace recalls having used the Union's special glow-in-the-dark paint before. In her memory, Benjamin clarifies why the new furniture finish isn't commercially available like the paint. He explains the finish is a unique material that increases furniture durability, and it's on everything except the study items. Grace deduces the fog must be from the finishing material, suspecting the Union might be deceiving Benjamin. She sweetly suggests getting an explanation from the Union, and Benjamin offers to contact them for her. Grace politely declines his offer, privately reasoning that giving them a warning would allow them to coordinate their lies. She quickly flips through a book, intent on finding information. Realizing the book is a detailed inventory, she's pleased to have a faster way to locate the cursed furniture. She holds a glowing pendulum, a tool she's been using for her investigation. Looking at the pendulum, she reflects that carrying it has made her work easier. As she wonders about her power's color, she learns that not all holy power manifests as light. She realizes holy power reflects the soul's color, and since the Saintess Arya never mentioned it, she must be unaware. Feeling there's still too much she doesn't know, Grace decides to prioritize regaining her memories. Seeking a safe place to begin, she dismisses the fireplace and decides to use the bathroom again. Standing before the bathroom door, she steadies herself to begin her memory retrieval. As a dark fog approaches from under the furniture, she feels confident she can handle it. She focuses, her expression firm with concentration. A wash of turquoise light emanates from her as she activates her power, surrounded by ethereal white flowers. Startled back to reality, Grace realizes another memory of Benjamin has surfaced, one that he must remember. She nervously peeks out from the bathroom. A wave of dizziness hits her, a feeling she instantly recognizes. The sensation reminds her of the side effects she experienced at the Gate Control Bureau. She recalls that the dizziness is a side effect of using her holy power. Clutching her head, she struggles with the sudden, debilitating throbbing. A maid expresses concern, suggesting she rest, and Grace agrees. Grace sits up in her bed, having taken the maid's advice. Benjamin appears at her door, worried after hearing she was unwell, but she insists she's fine. He disregards her protests and purposefully sits on her bed. Holding her hand, Benjamin instructs the maid not to leave his wife alone when she's unwell anymore. Lying down, Grace is taken aback, questioning his use of the word anymore. Benjamin smiles gently and asks to be excused for a moment. He tenderly places a hand on her forehead, causing her to gasp in surprise. Gently covering her eyes, he tells her that she's very tired and needs to rest. The scene transitions, showing bright leaves against a clear sky. Later, Benjamin stands pensively beside a grand carriage outside the manor. Grace, now feeling better, joins him outside and expresses her genuine gratitude for his care. She smiles confidently, promising him that she won't collapse again. A vision of a saintess with flowing white hair appears in her mind. Clasping her hands, Grace grows frustrated, wondering if this power belonged to the original Grace all along. Her eyes widen as a sudden thought strikes her. She sees a memory of a hand being offered to her. The memory is of Benjamin, smiling warmly as he holds his hand out to her amidst a field of flowers. Deciding to deal with the mystery later, Grace resolves that she has somewhere important to be. Benjamin gently takes her hand in his. They arrive at the towering and impressive Magecraft Union building. She takes a determined step forward. Inside the building, Grace stands with a look of nervous resolve. At the Magecraft Union, Grace and Benjamin are greeted at the door by two employees. The two union members present them with unnervingly wide, forced smiles. As Grace wonders how to begin, Benjamin directly confronts an employee about the flaws in the recently supplied furniture. Benjamin gives them an out, acknowledging that flaws are understandable since they only apply the finishing touches. He then cheerfully explains that his wife wanted to discuss the matter. Grace inwardly clarifies she was just curious. Benjamin requests an engineer to explain the finishing material to Grace, and an eager employee assures them many are available. The scene transitions to a grand, sunlit view of the Magecraft Union's towering architecture. Inside an office, a table is set with documents, scrolls, and tea, ready for a meeting. Benjamin notes the light paperwork, explaining to Grace that he only deals with final, approved documents. Grace questions his methods, suggesting it might be better to review everything from the start. He explains there's a specific reason why he doesn't interfere with the earlier stages of the process. Benjamin reveals his philosophy. Making special exceptions ultimately causes harm to the weakest people involved. Grace is impressed by his thoughtful principle, but playfully notes he still uses his high position quite effectively. He smiles warmly and dismisses her observation as half a joke. Visibly moved with a tear in her eye, Grace realizes his words were completely serious. A quiet, contemplative moment passes between them in the ornate office. The union employee returns, presenting a small box as a token of sincerity, which Grace accepts. Benjamin eyes the box, noting that it doesn't look like a typical magic device. The employee introduces it as an everlasting flower, catching Grace's surprised attention. The ornate, hexagonal box glows with a faint, magical light. In a sinister shift, the employee whispers to Grace that the gift is actually an appetite-curbing medicine. Maintaining a pleasant smile, Grace politely declines the gift, noting it originated from the Merchant Guild. She quickly changes the subject, asking to tour other areas due to her limited time, flustering the employee. Benjamin supports her, but the employee tries to delay, claiming the lab isn't organized for a visit. Benjamin gently pressures him, questioning whether neglecting their duty to be organized is appropriate. He turns the decision back to Grace, asking where she would like to go first. Grace is momentarily startled, turning her head as she considers her next move. With a confident smirk, Benjamin reveals he studied up in preparation to guide her, much to her confusion. He blushes, admitting he didn't want to seem unprepared, and quickly memorized all the details. Flustered herself, Grace reassures him that there's no reason to be so embarrassed. They arrive at a rustic workshop, which is introduced as the furniture manufacturing area. Grace finds the workshop surprisingly ordinary, and Benjamin confirms he already inspected their standard process after the last incident. She recalls the pebble explosion and questions why the association makes furniture themselves, learning it's due to magic stones in the materials. At Benjamin's prompting, the employee explains that the furniture is made with depleted magic stones. He boasts that the material is unique, strong, precious, and has been verified as completely safe. Grace internally scoffs, thinking that she has rarely encountered anything more dangerous. The employee passionately defends the depleted magic stones, insisting they are recycled Empire property and not simply discarded junk. Grace smiles, thanks him, and then pointedly asks if the dangerous finishing materials are made there too. The employee's expression shifts, realizing she was after information about the finishing materials all along. With a creak, he opens a door and leads them further into the facility. As they walk, Grace asks Benjamin if he has ever been to this area of the Union before. He admits he's only seen the raw materials, not the process, prompting her to ask if it's a restricted area. Benjamin smirks, clarifying that he could go in any time but chooses not to because he dislikes it. Surprised by his aversion, Grace simply asks him, why? He explains the magic stones are often the massive, unsettling bones and hearts of magic beasts before being processed. Grace looks up thoughtfully, feeling a pang of sympathy for the people in the north who fight those creatures. Benjamin reassures her that it's a worthy contribution to the Empire once the parts are processed, Clenching her fist, Grace wonders aloud if it would benefit Benjamin if the Saintess went north to eliminate the magic beasts. Her question hangs in the air as a radiant vision of the Saintess appears in her mind. Benjamin agrees it would be wonderful if the Saintess could fight, but notes there are no historical records of it being possible. A sudden chill runs through Grace as a realization begins to dawn on her. An employee interrupts them, cheerfully announcing that the mess from the Pebble incident has been mostly cleaned up. Taking the opportunity to move on, Benjamin suggests they continue with their tour. They are led to a foreboding stone staircase that ascends to a large, ornate door. The scene transitions, an unsettling gray texture filling the view. As she stands at the bottom of the stairs, Grace is struck by a strange, unnerving feeling. She senses a familiar mist that is somehow invisible, wondering if it's because the material is unprocessed, but feels confident with her pendulum at the ready. Clutching her glowing pendulum, Grace prepares herself as ethereal flowers manifest around her. The employee opens the heavy door, gesturing for them to enter the restricted area. Inside, Benjamin recoils in disgust at the sight of depleted magic stones, which the guide presents, but Grace recognizes them as holy stones. The employee explains that the depleted magic stones, though varied in color, become beautiful ordinary stones, which they are recycling. He holds up a bottle, revealing the dangerous finishing material is made by grinding these very stones. Grace inspects the material but feels no energy, questioning her own judgment despite having clearly eliminated the mists before. Noticing her focus, Benjamin comments on her interest, but she plays it off as simple amazement at the material's strengthening properties. The employee adds that the fireplace bricks were also made from used magic stones, explaining the earlier explosion. Grace finally understands why the black mist from the fireplace was so much more potent. She smiles warmly, thanking the employee for the valuable information and his concern. Flattered, the employee earnestly requests that they continue to patronize the Magic Tool Association. Grace realizes the association's true goal isn't just business. She suspects they, like the temple, want the Felton ducal family to die. The grand Felton ducal estate is shown, the target of a hidden conspiracy. In her mind, she sees the aftermath of her own death, a future where her demise is just the beginning. She deduces their ultimate target is a grief-stricken Benjamin, stripped of all support, but the employee interrupts, asking about documents. Back in the office, Benjamin expresses frustration over the paperwork, but Grace urges him to attend to his duties, assuring him it's fine. With a weary smile, Benjamin laments his work, promising to return soon before departing. Grace watches him go, noting how busy he seems to be. The employee offers to continue the tour in Benjamin's absence, and Grace readily agrees. In a laboratory, the employee chatters excitedly about the equipment, but Grace is unimpressed, understanding none of it. He presents a small, ornate ring, explaining it's a key component that forms the center of a gate. While Grace observes its small size, the employee mentions their failed attempt to use the components to create medical tools for the human body. She offers a polite but knowing smile in response to his explanation. The narration explains the Felton family's history of pursuing magical healing tools due to their distrust of holy power-based treatments. Admitting their failures, the employee nervously reveals an ongoing investigation into the gate itself, prompted by an incident last year. He immediately claps a hand over his mouth, horrified that he let the secret slip to her. With a sharp look, Grace questions who gave the order to hide this information, musing on the short list of people with that authority. Her curiosity ignited, she considers asking Benjamin about the incident upon his return. Terrified, the employee begs her not to involve Benjamin and impulsively decides to whisper the truth to her himself. He reveals that a major accident occurred at the Gate Management Bureau, causing the entire building to collapse. The crisis was compounded by the fact that Benjamin was away in the duchy hunting magical beasts at the time. Shocked, Grace asks about the former Duke and Duchess, learning they were missing after the collapse. He explains they were found dead on a northern road and couldn't be given a proper funeral out of respect for the gate victims. It's revealed they had deliberately taken a carriage to visit Benjamin, tragically avoiding the gate disaster only to meet their end elsewhere. After hurriedly taking over the ducal title, Benjamin's first act was to erect a memorial at the site of the collapsed bureau. Following the memorial, he swiftly had the Gate Management Bureau rebuilt. A quiet moment of understanding dawns on Grace as the pieces of the past fall into place. She thinks of Benjamin's sorrow, but notices the employee's nervousness, sensing there's more to the story. Grace confronts him, pointing out the strangeness of everyone assuming her ignorance about her own parents-in-law's death, and demands a full explanation. Her gaze hardens as she questions why her lack of knowledge is taken for granted. insisting she wants to hear everything. The employee panics and confesses that it was the Duke himself who ordered him not to mention the incident to the Duchess. Pondering this, Grace considers that Benjamin may have had his own reasons for omitting the story, not necessarily to deceive her. With a gentle smile, Grace promises the employee she won't tell Benjamin, and then inquires about gate safety improvements. He assures her they are working hard to make the gates sturdier, which she finds reassuring. Claiming she is tired, Grace asks for a library, and the employee informs her that it is accessible. At her request, the employee begins leading her toward the library. They arrive at the entrance of a vast and beautifully lit library. Grace selects a large, ornately bound book from one of the shelves. Holding the book, she dismisses the employee, asking him to inform Benjamin of her whereabouts. She recalls with confidence that a knight of the Felton ducal house guards the library's entrance. The employee nervously confirms her request and excuses himself, telling her to get comfortable. Now alone in the quiet library, she scans her surroundings, wondering what secrets the room holds. She identifies a restricted door for non-mages, concluding it must contain research results on magic stones. Grace approaches the door, her expression determined as she prepares to bypass its security. She perceives a magical security system, confident that her newfound divine power can disrupt it. She worries that using her power recklessly could destroy the entire security system, not just disable it. Pondering how to delicately break the lock, she realizes she needs a tool that can handle both divine and magic power. She remembers her pendulum and pulls it from her dress. Recalling how she used the pendulum's divine power to handle the mist, she focuses her energy. A brilliant blue light radiates from the pendulum as she channels her power, surrounded by ethereal flowers. A crackle of energy strikes a lock component, and she mentally corrects herself that it isn't completely broken. She stares at her hand, surprised as the pendulum continues to glow brightly. Suddenly, the pendulum's light extinguishes, leaving it dormant in her palm. She tries to channel her power into it again, but feels nothing, realizing with concern that it isn't working anymore. Worried the pendulum is completely broken, her immediate concern is that someone will find out what she did. She quietly enters the now accessible, restricted room. Looking around the inner sanctum, she wonders if this is where the experiment logs were stored. She quickly locates a book titled Magic Stone Recycling Experiment. As she flips through the pages, she finds the dense, technical writing nearly impossible to understand. Her expression brightens as she finally stumbles upon a section she can comprehend. The book describes magic stones as gems with mystical powers that can also be harvested from monsters. She reads that the Felton Duchy's magic stones are of the highest quality, and that purity increases the farther north one goes. The page is filled with dense, handwritten research notes. The information makes Grace recall the gem found in the polluted forest, which Benjamin said shared properties with magic stones. An entry explains that magic stones lose their gem-like appearance and revert to a mundane form once their power is gone. It also notes that stones from monsters don't fully deplete their power, and not every monster's heart becomes a magic stone. Grace theorizes that the pale, sacred stone inside her now broken pendulum might actually be a monster's bone. The unsettling realization makes her recoil in shock. Shaking off the scary thought, her attention is caught by a strange valve-like safe hidden behind a bookshelf. Her hand hovers, contemplating her next move. Believing there must be another clue, she resolves to check the safe. Upon opening it, she discovers a document room and cautiously decides to enter. The small room is in disarray, with stacks of documents and scrolls piled on the floor and desk. She finds research logs about developing medical tools using the gate, just as the employee had mentioned. Her eyes widen in focus as she discovers a particularly interesting document. Artificial magic stone production experiment. The document reveals the experiment took place in a blighted county, causing the Rondell Canal pollution, a mystery from the original story. A brief memory flashes of the original novel's main couple by the water. Grace stares at the document, a wave of shock washing over her as the pieces connect. The research notes detail how an artificial mana stone can be created by crushing the life force of nearby creatures in an area like the Ardell County. The research was a success, as a gloved hand holds a newly formed, glowing mana stone. Grace realizes with grim certainty that the mages knew their experiment was polluting the canal, and that Benjamin is completely unaware. Examining a sponsor list, Grace identifies the temple's mark, but is baffled by a second, unknown symbol. A rustle from behind a bookshelf reveals a masked figure in a white uniform watching her. Startled by the sudden presence, Grace turns and asks who is there. A man in a white robe grabs her, urgently asking if she is the Duchess of Felton. Grace analyzes his uniform, concluding he's not a standard mage. He gestures frantically, pleading with her to listen to his story. She silently questions if his elaborate robe is a mage's work uniform. She notes with curiosity that his uniform looks rather old. The man suddenly kneels, and a surprised Grace thanks him. He introduces himself as a non-union mage and asks if she knows about the mage union's tyranny. Grace shakes her head, completely unaware of the situation he's describing. He explains that the union is corrupt, exploiting its review system to control affiliations. He declares that the union's corruption prevents truly qualified mages from being hired. Understanding his plight, Grace asks why he has come to her for help. He asks if she is not the one who helps the shunned, prompting her to ask who told him that. A brief, smiling image of a young woman appears. The mage reveals that his informant was Miss Cleta. The mention of Cleta's name visibly startles Grace. The mage offers to provide Grace with all the information his group has gathered. Grace cautiously asks if he is certain the information will be useful to her. He confidently assures her it will be, as he knows what was said about her during the orphanage fire. Shocked, Grace covers her mouth, demanding to know how he could possibly know about that incident. He explains that unrecognized mages often operate in the underworld, where he heard the news. He continues, stating he learned of her connection to Cleta while selling items in the back alleys. Grace ponders his words, uncertain whether to consider this new information a good or bad thing. She asks about his colleagues and then proposes a deal, asking for his help with one thing. The mage readily agrees, promising to do anything she asks. A hand slaps down a finished document with a sigh of relief. Benjamin stretches, finally done with his mountain of paperwork. He asks an attendant about Grace's whereabouts, and the attendant informs him she is in the library. Benjamin expresses surprise and mentions the mage who was supposed to be guiding her, then pauses thoughtfully. He recalls the employee who was with his wife, a suspicious glint in his eye. Benjamin turns to the attendant, pointedly asking if a mage is guiding Grace right now. As the attendant stammers, Benjamin looks out the window and sternly comments on his laxness. Benjamin rises, deciding to deal with the attendant later as he hurries to find his wife in the library. While being led, he recognizes he's heading toward the library. A wave of panic washes over Benjamin as he realizes Grace is there, feeling an urgent need to check on her. He anxiously calls out for his wife in his thoughts, as Grace is shown clutching her neck. Grace turns to him with a playful wink, cheekily asking, "Why? Your Excellency?" Benjamin stops dead in his tracks, rendered completely speechless by her unexpected behavior,